United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we have roll call, Bonnie, please?
Commissioner Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Fleece?
Present.
Max Bauer?
Here.
Thomas?
Here.
Richardson?
Here.
Stepka?
Here.
Friend?
Here.
Inman?
Here.
Chairman Hooper?
Here. All right, I am open to the approval of the minutes.
So moved.
Support.
We have motion and support. Larry?
Or no, this would be on the, not the minutes, but we have just a typo in our agenda here that I happen to notice under 10, new business. Budget discussion, I think should read 2011 instead of 2001.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
It'd be easier to talk about 2001.
Certainly would.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Now we have our first opportunity for public comment. Anyone who wish to address the board would now step forward. Anyone from the board like to say anything? Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of the agenda.
Move for approval as presented?
With Larry's change.
Yes.
Support.
Okay, have motion support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. We have a special order of business? No, then let's move on to the consent calendar, please.
The purpose of the consent calendar is to expedite business by grouping non-controversial items together to be dealt with by one commission motion without discussion. Any member of the commission, staff, or the public may ask that any item on the consent calendar be removed therefrom and placed elsewhere on the agenda for full discussion. Such requests will be automatically respected. If any item is not removed from the consent calendar, the action noted, receive and file or approval, is approved by a single committee action adopting the consent calendar. A, receive and file. Number 1, Housing Liaison Report and Project Listing. Number 2, Grand Traverse Conservation District Staff Report, May 2010. Number 3, Grand Traverse County Road Commission Monthly Report. Number 4, Parks and Recreation Report. Number 5, Aquatic Update. B, Approval. Number 1, Inter-County District Court Operating Agreement. Number 2, Veterans Affairs Staffing Plan Amendment.
Okay, is there anyone from the public that would like to remove anything from the consent calendar at this time? Anyone from the board? Chris?
Number 4 and number 5 under receive and file, please.
Okay, we can move those down to, we want to go to unfinished business. Make it 3 and 4 there. Okay,
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the consent calendar as amended.
Support.
we have a motion and support. We have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Fleece?
Yes.
Max Bauer?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yep.
Richardson?
Yes.
Stepka?
Yes.
Friend?
Yes.
Inman?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Hooper?
Yes. All right, now we move on to number 8, department action items with facilities, please.
Good morning. Danny Brown, Director of Facilities. Okay, I'm here today to discuss and get approval, hopefully, to replace the stairs on the south side of this building. And in your packets, there was 6 bidders. And if we're going to have the stairways rebuilt, I would recommend having Hallmark Construction do that. And we could have a discussion about the alternate number 1, which is the electrification of the stairs for ice melting.
I have a question.
Larry?
Danny, I'm assuming that we still have inmates doing our shoveling in the
Yes.
winter outside the governmental center, and that probably would also include those stairways if we get them fixed and untaped and everything.
Yes, I
So,
would.
So it would be convenient to have the electrical thing, but in terms of clearing of snow and throwing down of, you know, a little bit of sand and maybe some de-icer or whatever, do you think that would be sufficient for coverage on those stairs?
I think it would.
Okay.
Beth?
Dean isn't here. Oh, Dean, you are here. You're just not there.
Where is he? He's back in the room.
It says based on availability with the capital improvement fund, so I was just wondering if you could speak a minute to that.
When we discussed this, Dennis and myself with Danny, there are not, this is obviously not budgeted in the facilities fund at this point, and the only place where we would have, not the only place, but the recommended funding source would be the CIP fund at this point. I don't know if that was one of the items that we had listed as a possible project this year. I can go back upstairs and...
I don't think it was
I don't think
one
it
of the
was.
ones, because it wasn't put in the last year's budget, because it already had been approved in previous budgets. But
Right.
do you have any idea what the fund balance is in there, Dean? Roughly?
Well, I believe we ended 2009 with about a $1.2 million fund balance in that fund. We have purchased patrol vehicles out of that fund this year. That is the fund that we pay for the our 50% share of the road improvement bonds from 2008. There are funds available. It's just a question of how that fits in with all of our other priorities or anything else that might come up between now and the end of the year.
I talked with Dennis about this yesterday, and I mean, as much as I'd like to save the money, and I don't think that we should keep the tape up there, and I think it's it's a safety issue, and I think that it needs to be done. And I agree. I mentioned to Dennis yesterday, let's get the inmates off their bunks at 10 in the morning and shoveling. I'm good with that.
Larry?
I agree.
Danny, what's the probability of using hot water for the melt instead of electricity?
Well, you'd have to put a boiler in, obviously, and all that other stuff.
Well, isn't this, don't you have a boiler in this building?
Yes, it's in that corner, however. So it's it would be the furthest point away from it. There would have to be some kind of heat exchanger put over there, actually.
And if you use the inmates, you're still going to use salt because of the ice situation.
We're going to use something, yes.
Yeah, and which is going to destroy the steps again. I think we need to either go with the electric or the hot water. One of the two.
Here we go, Sonny and then Ross.
Mr. Chairman, just to remind everyone that I won't be part of this discussion or this vote, I bid the railings to 4 of these contractors.
Okay, and Ross?
Dennis,
Yes.
you were talking about using some money out of the facilities fund this year for balancing budget, so is there enough money to pay for this out of the facilities fund rather than the capital improvements?
I'll defer that to Dean.
There is a fund balance in the facilities fund, but one of the things that we're doing in the 2010 budget is we're reducing the county general fund appropriation because of the fund balance that we've accumulated over time. And that fund balance comes from the general fund appropriations that have been made that have not been used because we haven't done a number of projects, or we can never estimate utility expenses with 100% accuracy. So there is some impact on availability of fund balance for use in the 2011 budget. Should we can find funds in the facilities fund to do this as well. It's going to have an impact on the fund balance, though.
Dean, after we take out the money, after we utilize fund balance this year, because of the reduced general fund appropriation to make up the $750,000 shortfall in taxes, are you comfortable that there's sufficient funds in this fund to pay for the stairs? And will that reduce the fund balance in the facilities fund to an unsatisfactory level? And if so, do you prefer the CIP fund? I think that's what Commissioner's asking.
Well, In the facilities fund, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. The primary source of revenue is our general fund appropriations. There are some revenues that are generated. The fact that we have a fund balance in that fund helps us with budgets, not only in the current year, but going forward. There are funds available to do this in the facilities fund, but it will reduce, our projected end-of-the-year fund balance, which has an impact on, the amount of that fund balance that we could use to help balance the 2011 budget.
But that's true wherever it comes from. I mean, it's going to reduce something wherever it comes from, right?
That's true.
Right, it's really all the same pot, even though we have it split into different pieces.
Okay, Larry, and then Chris?
I would make a motion that we accept the low bid from Hallmark Construction in the amount of $48,500 for the base bid and the alternate.
I'll second it.
With the funding to come from, where are you
Taking the
suggesting?
The funding to be determined by staff, by Mr. Bott.
Okay, we have a motion support by Richardson. Any further comment, Chris?
Danny, if we don't fix these stairs, will the rest of them deteriorate?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they've been deteriorating for the last 2 or 3 years. Now the other side is deteriorating as well. And just to clarify, I think we both talked, CIP fund is where we would recommend it come from.
All right. Larry, then Ross?
Can you give us just kind of a feeling on, if we do the alternate, where we're not spreading salt and sand and stuff on those on a constant basis and hacking them with shovels and everything. So, what would be the anticipated life with the alternate heating the stairs versus not heating the stairs? Are we looking
Well,
at
they've lasted 33 years.
without being heated?
That's correct.
And being heated?
And being heated probably 50 years,
Forever.
without putting salt on it or some kind of aggregate.
Plus, it's a much safer situation. There's no probability of ice being on there or anything, or even the salt getting slippery in.
It's the same system that we have at the Hall of Justice.
Oh, it is?
Mhm.
Oh.
On the front.
And those stairways going up. Oh, I see.
Them are always
I don't think you could say that they're gonna last any longer. No proof of it.
Yeah, there's no proof of that. I mean, it's all as good as the concrete that's put in initially. I mean,
Well, you do know that without putting salt on there, they're not gonna deteriorate as fast.
Right.
I mean,
That would make sense.
that's, I think, factual.
Ross?
So the bid of 48,500 is also plus the 4,500 for the
That's
electric
correct.
connections on the building. Do you have any idea how much electricity this uses?
I anticipated somebody asking me that question, and I thought through that, and I thought, there's just no way that I can bring up that figure. I mean, certainly I could take the wattage and go that way, but really, it all depends. This system has a sensor in each of the landings, and it actually senses the fact that there's snow on the stairway itself, and so it all depends on the weather. There's just no way to really gauge what it's going to draw.
But it only works when it has to, is what you're saying.
That's right.
And
That's right.
Dennis, is there, do we end up billing the city for any portion of this?
Yes, we would. The cities own 26% approximately of this building, so they would pay for 26% of the cost of that stairwell improvement.
Okay, any further discussion?
Could you repeat the motion?
We have a motion to, Bonnie, go ahead.
The motion was by Fleece, seconded by Richardson, to accept or award the bid to Hallmark Construction for base and alternate, and funding to be determined by staff.
So 48,500
Yeah, you gotta
Yeah.
add the 4,500, right,
Plus
Larry?
4,500.
plus
No,
45.
45 is in there. That's what you said, right?
No, it's not.
No, it's an
No,
additional
it's in addition
4,500. You have to
Yeah,
add
but
to it.
that's out of your budget, right? Interdepartmental?
No.
No, it's out of capital. CIP.
No, the only difference, the reason why that's in there is I would have my electricians, because the main service is in this corner, and to run this all through the building to get it outside, I'd have my electricians do that. But the $4,500 is for the material only, not the labor.
So 53,000.
Pardon?
53,000.
Correct.
Okay,
Is that okay with your motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll change the total to 53,000 in the motion.
all right. Everybody happy with that? And let's go with a roll call vote, please, Linda, or Lonnie. Excuse me.
Commissioner
Early
Maxbauer?
morning.
Yes.
Thomas?
No.
Richardson?
Yes.
Stepka?
Yes.
Friend?
No.
Inman?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Abstain, please.
Fleece?
Yes.
Hooper?
Yes.
Passed.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we can move on to the Register of Deeds, staffing plan request, page 38.
Morning.
Morning.
I'm here to save money for the county.
Cool.
I'm requesting that I be giving the permission to hire an office clerk and eliminate the chief deputy position in my office at this time.
Move for approval as presented.
Support.
Okay, I have a motion to support. Any further discussion? Larry?
I would like to thank Peggy for, making this recommendation, as a balance to the service that she has to the public in her office, and also the sensitivity of trying to save money for the county. And I appreciate the recommendation, and hard work in her staff that generates a lot of revenue for the county.
And in Peg's case, because her budget is completely funded by revenues, there's no general fund money in it, she's not going to be in a position in the 2011 budget where she has to reduce her general fund appropriation down, obviously, but this money will help, this savings will help with balancing the other cuts we have to make in the budget, so.
Hey, Christine?
Peggy, this is undoubtedly going to add extra work to your plate, isn't it?
Yes,
Thank you.
we're just, across the board, everybody's picking up the workload, but truly, in an office of 4 staff and myself, you do not need 2 bosses.
And some of our, I think it's important to know, some of the elected officials are required to have a chief deputy, the clerk, for example. The Register of Deeds is not, so it's her choice.
In a county under 500,000, yeah, I'm not, I may have one, but I don't have to have.
I think we're good for a while on that. 500.
Sonny?
Peggy, the only question I had, and I understand that, business per se in your office, like, because of the economic situation, is slower. Do you think if the economy turns around and it gets busy again, the chief deputy is going to be important, or do you think we'll still be able to meet the needs with the extra clerk?
As long as I have a staff that I can rely on, I don't see why. I mean, I know
was just
if the
concerned
work-
about making a permanent staffing change if we thought that if the economy turned around, we'd need that deputy back.
Wasn't this your preference for your organization of your department?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
It is. I truly feel that I know if the work's not getting done, if I'm not there, I don't need somebody there telling them what to do.
Okay. We have a motion to support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Okay, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we can move on now to Human Resources.
Good morning.
Morning.
Jen Seaman, Human Resources Director. The first item is the additional compensation for the Sheriff's Department. From time to time, they receive grants that sometimes the sergeants or the deputies and the sergeants cannot handle. Therefore, it may be just due to time or things of that nature. So a lieutenant or captain might take on fulfilling that grant and doing some extra work for us. And so they are exempt employees, and so they are already paid the salary. So paying them above that salary for additional work, basically with a grant, we can do that as long as we have the appropriate approval process in place. And so that's what we're doing here. And attached to was also our our salary, the policy, exempt employees, additional compensation for salaried employees policy that the county has in place. So that's what we're here today. The
Mr.
Sheriff's
Chairman,
Department.
I would move to approve the payment of additional compensation to the Sheriff's Office exempt personnel as per the outlined documents.
Support.
Moved by Wheelock, support by Thomas. Any further discussion? Ross?
So, Jen, this is basically so that we can take advantage of grants from the Office of Highway and Safety Planning?
Mhm. Yep.
With a little more flexibility in the way we staff it?
Correct, correct. Yep, and the lieutenant and captain would be paid at the sergeant or deputy pay rate as well. So they're not going to be paid at their rate, it's going to be paid at what the grant specifies, whether it's a sergeant or the deputy as well.
But it's state money, not county money.
Correct, yep.
And Dennis?
Jen, the only thing that I want to be sure of, first of all, is that by doing so, we're not going to be violating the contracts with the sergeant's contract or anything, that we're replacing work.
Nope.
We're okay with that.
Yep.
And then the second thing that I would say is, it's important that we utilize the sergeants first. I know a number of our lieutenants and captains may be getting towards retirement age, and I want to make sure that we're not using this kind of opportunity to add to their final average compensation as opposed to giving it to the appropriate people to do the work. That's really all I want to be sure of.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, yep. And I think that they've had some staffing challenges in the sheriff's department in the deputies and sergeant levels that recently that has caused some of.
I mean, this should only be a last resort if they can't.
And
fill
from
with
time
other
to time,
people.
this is the first time it's come up, and I've been here 6 months, so.
Okay, thanks.
Further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Okay, and now our next item is new job classification, deputy court administrator.
Yep. We reviewed this with Terry Quinn from Circuit Court. She would like to place a Circuit Court administrator into the classification plan. And we did take a look at what she had proposed, and this is simply just adding it to the job classification plan. At this time, you know, Terry has, we're still waiting on what she's going to do with it, but this is just adding it to the classification plan at this time.
Jen, do you have any letters or any letter from the judges indicating their support and request for this position?
I do not. I do not.
And then, obviously, as Jen has told you, what they're saying is they'd like to, they wanted to add this position in the budget last year. We didn't recommend it. And I think there was some communication over issues over there. They didn't realize, even though we sent them the thing saying not recommended, you know, or wasn't in the budget, that it was in the budget, so they're asking for it to be added. I have not had any discussions with the judges or with Terry, I don't think, since that time. But the obvious question is, even if you add it to the staffing, how's it going to be funded in light of the cuts that we're facing and things like that? And I don't have answers to that. I don't know if they've sent anything kind of with a plan for how they would do it. So what they're saying here is they'd like the position in the staffing plan, but they would still have to come back to the board for reallocating the money and appropriating.
Correct.
To staff it.
Correct.
Since they're, and you may not know the answer to this, Jen, but I guess I'm asking this question out loud. Since they are the employer, if the staffing plan is changed, do they have the ability just to say, we're appointing somebody and just doing it without coming back to the county? That's a kind of a general question. I don't know that you can answer it. We had sent this back to them with some questions, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And then this now, you're comfortable with where this point factors? This is where it belongs?
Yep, we did have some discussion.
Have we received correspondence from them saying their intention is to implement it?
I have not received anything lately. No, we reviewed this a while ago, and then with everything going on, with a lot of the discussions going on with the Siegel Committee and things like that, I basically put it on hold. So, I haven't heard anything recently.
So if you decide to approve this, my suggestion would be to approve it contingent on receiving a financial plan from the court indicating how they're going to staff it in light of the cuts for 2011.
And Sonny?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the addition of a deputy court administrator to the circuit courts, in the circuit court position, but to advise the circuit court that this position cannot be filled without authorization by this board.
Well, I don't know that,
Well, we still have to control their budget, and we have to approve the funding for it. And if we don't approve the funding for it, they can't fill the position.
well, if the funding's in the existing, we're having discussion without a second to the motion. I guess that's not really appropriate.
Is there support?
Might want to rephrase that.
If you wish, I will rephrase to approve the deputy court administrator, but funding has to be identified prior to implementation.
I'll support it.
Support by Inman, please. Chris?
I won't support this unless I hear from the judges.
I would be more inclined to support tabling it for a month until we get the information back that Dennis mentioned.
That makes sense. I would agree with that as well.
So we just have a motion to table and support, is that what you're saying?
No, we have a motion to pass, so if you
That's right.
turn it down, then you can table.
Well, no. I believe that you can make a motion now to table, and that has precedence over the earlier motion,
So I'd
and will
make
be
a-
voted on without discussion.
I'll make a motion to table it for 1 month.
Support.
Okay, now we have a motion to table and support by Stepka. Motion by Beth, support by Stepka. Okay, any further discussion?
No discussion on a motion to table.
All right, then all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Okay. We table it until next month at the,
And then we will ask the court to provide you with a financial plan for how they're going to manage this, and we'll bring it back next month.
okay. We'll move on to number 3, classification plan for new position planner.
Yep, this is a planner, new position being added to the classification plan. And John is up next to discuss in more detail the direction for his department. But this position is being added, and you will see that the education and experience necessary for this position, we are looking for a bachelor's degree and 2 to 4 years of related experience, looking for someone to come in that really has this would be a exempt position as well, in our non-contract exempt pay grade. Did take a look at that, and the level of independent judgment and freedom that this planner would have would place it as an exempt position. You can see the points there.
I was going to just make the motion to pass this until, because I thought there was all of the money came from the EPA Brownfield Land Bank, but I guess there's the same question a little bit with the 10% from the general fund
Yep.
in light of some of the changes.
I'm gonna suggest that we change the order of this, and that perhaps you hear from John and hear his whole reorganization discussion, and then consider this after that fact. And I think then, Commissioner, we can get into more detail about the 10%, and whether or not that needs to come from the general fund. If that's okay with commissioners, does that make sense? Go ahead, John.
Good morning, John Syke, Director of Planning and Development Department. And before I get into a proposed reorganization plan for the Planning and Development Department, I'd just like to give some background. One of the reasons that I'm proposing this reorganization plan is some of the success that the county has achieved over the last several years, and that success has been in terms of jobs created and retained in the county, growth management and protection of our environment, cleanup of our environment, redevelopment of our urban core, and creation of affordable housing. Throughout the years, there's been several boards and authorities created. In 1978, you created an Economic Development Corporation. In 1985, a County Planning Commission. 1997, Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. 2004 Farmland and Open Space Preservation Board, and 2006 Land Bank Authority. And in the new decade, we're also considering the possible venture into creating a housing commission. And the success has really resulted in these particular programs based on the leadership provided by the county. And I think probably one of the best gauges of this success in realizing how well this county has done has been the reputation that this county has in other parts of the state and other peers that I'm involved with around the state. The success has also been based on the talented individuals that the county has hired that have implemented the vision created by the residents of this county and their leaders. Up until this point, the resources that have been appropriated for these programs has been very limited, and we're at a point now, if we're going to continue, that we need to review our staffing of these programs. We're currently, I believe, at capacity, but unfortunately, we do have some of these programs do provide additional resources to address staffing needs. If you review the memo that I provided in your packet, you'll see some of the more recent activities that we've been working on. But one of the key projects I think that is really the tipping point here is our $1 million EPA Brownfield Revolving Loan Fund grant. That is the one that has really kind of put us to a point where we have to thoroughly evaluate the department and how it's staffed. This is an entirely new program, and at this point, I don't believe we have the adequate capacity to staff that appropriately. There's also another issue. As you may know, when I arrived here, the planning department was separate, essentially from the Brownfield program and the EDC. We have merged those particular programs together and created the Planning and Development Department. We've also incorporated the Land Bank Authority as part of that. And in order to maximize the capacity of this small office, okay, I'm sorry. In order to maximize the capacity of the small office, it's important that I create a team approach. We have a limited number of staff, and we need to reorganize, and I want to make sure that I have a staff that is cross-trained, so while they may not be experts in every aspect of the department, they are at least aware of what's going on. It's in order to provide smoother workflow and obtain more effective results. Finally, and I believe most importantly, I have staff members that are performing work that far outstretches their job descriptions. New programs and projects have been accumulated without any adjustments to the staffing. I have an experienced and very dedicated staff that are willing to take these challenges, except I feel that to take on additional work at this point is really taxing them to the point that I don't think is going to be effective. Therefore, I'm recommending a staffing plan for the Planning and Development Department that would include the addition of a full-time planner, a deputy director, and planning technician, and the deletion of the brownfield coordinator and office specialist. As I mentioned, some of these programs provide funding for staffing and administration. As part of that staffing plan, the planning technician would be a 100% non-general fund. It would be funded basically through brownfield and land bank. The planner position, which was just mentioned, as I'm proposing, would be 90% non-general fund. It would be basically 50% of the EPA grant, and the remaining, another 40% would be both brownfield and land bank, and then I'm proposing a final 10% to be funded by the general fund. I'm making that as part of this proposal to recognize that that position would be supporting some of the activities of the Planning Commission, and those are activities that are currently funded through the general fund. And that amount roughly would be less than $7,000.
Okay, Sonny.
Mr. Chairman, for discussion purposes, I will move to amend the Planning Department's staffing plan to reflect 1 full-time planner, 1 full-time deputy director, and 1 full-time planning commission, with the deletion of the brownfield coordinator and the office specialist.
Support.
We have motion and support. Any further discussion? Sonny?
Dennis, I guess I would like your input in this issue, please.
Yep. First of all, I support the reorganization of the office. Not all aspects of this work perfectly in terms of the ideal job descriptions or the ideal organization, but because of the small size of the staff, I think it's appropriate and it's probably the best option, and I support John in this. The thing is that I do agree they've taken on a number of additional jobs. What I want to be sure of is, John, when you say that they're at their maximum workload, I believe that to be true. I believe we've taken on actually more things than what we can handle, and I think the planner is going to help with that, and I think that's kind of your thought there. I also want to say that while I understand I understand what John's doing by saying he wants 10% of the planner paid for from the general fund. Typically, a planner would be 100% paid for by the general fund, and this financing of this operation is very unusual from my experience of how planning departments work, and it's really only the result of the grants and the programs that we're involved in. I would suggest, though, that because of these financial times, that we ask John to try to pick up the full planner from the grants, at least at this time, with a commitment from the board that down the road, when times improve, that we look at, supplementing that for the 10% or whatever. And the reason I say that is because, I understand exactly what he's saying. This planner will be doing planning functions, which is a county general fund function, and he doesn't want to lose sight of that, nor do I. But at this time, I think with the situation we have financially, and John is completely aware of the fact that he still has to make the cuts that we've given him for next year. He knows he's facing that. Almost all of this is funded from non-general funds, so I do support it. We've had some discussions about the deputy director's position, and ideally that position would be someone that would be hired that would have a bachelor's degree or beyond. But in this case, we have someone who's extremely experienced, has lots of years, has great contacts, and that's Jean Dorenzi, and she would be assuming that position of deputy director, and I'm comfortable with that. A commissioner asked me the question, why the 9 years, and I said I'd have to check that out. Well, I was talking to Jen today, and there's actually a really logical reason for it. The reason they came up with 9 years was a 4-year bachelor degree and 5 years experience. Jean Dorenzi actually has more experience than that, but that's how we came up with the 9 years, which I was not aware of, and so that's the answer to the question that the commissioner asked me. So I am supportive of this. I think it makes sense. I think the county is fortunate to have all these grant programs that will help support these positions at this time, but down the road I would expect to see us look at trying to find a way to help fund that planner position from general funds when things improve.
Hey, Ross?
John, wouldn't it be true that maybe one reason that the new planner is going to be funded 10% by general fund is just to give you more flexibility in how work is assigned to that individual?
Right, because
otherwise if it's 100%, from the brownfield grants, that's all they can work on, right?
Well, that's not how we've typically done that.
Okay.
Currently, the brownfield coordinator is funded 100% from brownfield, but that position is working in other programs.
Yeah.
But yes, it was to kind of suggest that there would be, that person would be doing some planning commission related activities, and that was the mindset behind that request.
Okay, and pay grade I, what pay range is that, John?
I believe it starts at like 39.
Okay.
I guess that it's a non-exempt, it's exempt, excuse me, it's a salaried position.
And then,
eligible for overtime.
so the office specialist is going away, being replaced by a planning technician. Does that mean that, that's actually under the union contract, right?
Correct.
So
It's an
that
existing job.
position would have to be bid. I mean,
Correct.
it's not an automatic,
Correct.
promotion from one position to the other for the person already in that position.
Correct.
Okay, and, what else was I going to say? Will there be any difference in pay grade from Brownfield Coordinator to Deputy Director?
It's one grade up.
One grade up, okay. So even with that, it's only about $7,000?
That's in terms of the planner position.
In terms of the planner from, oh, you mean in terms of the 10%?
Right.
Okay, so the
other,
so you're counting about less than $7,000 doesn't count the difference in, from Brownfield Coordinator to Deputy Director or Office Specialist to Planning Technician?
no, it's strictly just related, those
Although
other
those
two,
are both non-general fund money anyway.
right, those will
Okay,
be
I'm
100% either brownfield or land bank or combination, and that 10% is strictly that planner position only.
Okay, and then on the EPA revolving loan fund grant, does that, are you allowed a percentage of that grant for administration, or how does
Yes.
that, okay.
Yes, and that's, it's a 5-year grant, and we're proposing that will be ultimately, hopefully a self-sustaining program. We do have budgeted as part of that grant for that position to receive administrative cost coverage.
Okay, so at the end of 5 years, hopefully then the loan fund will be self-sustaining.
Like our
Yes.
brownfield fund and
Like,
EDC fund.
I mean, you'll still need approval from the EPA at that point, I guess.
Well, no, those funds will eventually become local once we loan those out.
Oh, okay.
That will be, the nice part about that program is the strings will go away. Once we get those monies loaned out, part of that $1 million will cover administration, but the remaining amount, what we intend to do is loan those monies out, and as we build that revolving loan fund, those dollars will be under our control. We will not have to have any sign-off with the EPA. So it's unlike, say, the EDC, which requires, state approval and that type of thing. This will be purely local.
Okay, so the 5-year term is the term during which you need like EPA sign-off, and then
Right.
that's pretty much when that stops happening.
Well, once we loan out those monies, and once those monies return to us in payments, that becomes our
Then they
money.
become local, okay.
Yeah, they give us a 5-year time period in which to basically expend that entire $1 million grant.
And just one other question, I'm sorry. Are you providing planning services for some of the townships now? Under contract or anything?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
I work with them. I do not have any contractual arrangements because while I assist them with professional, technical assistance, educational resources, that type of thing, I do not actually provide any planning functions for them.
Okay.
And Larry, do you have a question?
So the total cost of this reorganization to the general fund is $7,000 or less?
Yes.
What's the probability of a grant going away?
Of the grant going away? We have the grant, and we're actually in the process. The grant has been secured. I mean, we've gotten approval, and we're actually working with EPA on the work plan and implementation of that grant.
It's a $1 million grant that's here for 5 years.
And then forever.
And then the money stays here, whatever
That's
money it
assuming
generates.
that we're able to identify projects and loan
Right.
that money out
Oh,
and then recover.
exactly. That's correct.
And I think the point that would be is that the workload of identifying appropriate projects that qualify in the use of this money, and the workload that we've added to this department with, very simple things, the EPA grant, the EDC monies, the land bank, for example, and now the discussion of the housing trust fund. This is all added work to this department with no additional personnel. And I think that's the number one reason that we have to look at this is that, as we all know, that we've identified, a lot of extra work for this department over the last 4 or 5 years, and we haven't done anything about increasing their staffing capabilities. The reorganization and moving Gene upstairs with John and combining Brownfield and EDC into the planning department, but the workload just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the issues become more complicated. You know, there's no simple decisions anymore. Everything's complicated. You know, the land bank last month voted to go ahead and take back, 12 properties that came in on the tax foreclosure fund. Now, all of those properties had to be visited, identified, photographed. We're administrating the cleanup of the trash that was left on them, and someone has to do that. And, you know, we haven't added anybody to do that. So, you know, I certainly support this decision, and I do believe that many of the functions that are performed by this department do benefit the community as a whole, and therefore I will support the general fund appropriation, even though I understand the economic conditions of the county.
Well, I'd like to add too, speaking of the economic conditions and our tax base, that with Brownfield and the work that this planning department is doing, you have 3 properties in Traverse City that are going up, you know, on Park Street and West Front Street and Division and the parking deck that are all Brownfield money, plus the Grand Traverse Commons, which is a huge project, monumental, and it's biggest in the state. I think you have things going on now that are generating income and long-term tax base that this department is responsible for. Dennis.
I agree with the support that's being expressed for the program, but I still have a concern with the financing, and I'm going to ask John a simple question. If the county board approves this and adds $7,000 to the general fund, from the general fund for this position, and I've given you a budget, don't laugh, and I've given you a budget target for next year, that means your budget target next year is you're going to have to come up with another $7,000 in cuts. So my question is, what is the likelihood that part of what you recommend next year is going to be funding this $7,000 from the grant anyway, because you won't have the general fund appropriation to support it?
That's true. I mean, we do have the monies to cover that $7,000. I mean, the grants, the Brownfield and so forth can cover that.
I'm very happy with the commissioner's kind of stating that they're willing to do it within the general fund, and all I'm asking you is, if you're going to be able to absorb that and still keep that general fund appropriation, then, you know, I'm totally supportive of it. But if you're going to have to use that as part of your cuts and going to have to supplement it with grant money anyway, there's no reason to use $7,000 of general fund now. And I'm just asking I know it's throwing it at you.
I would not want to cut that. I mean, to me, I felt that was an amount that was somewhat of a placeholder, recognizing that we can't expect all these other programs to fund other activities that would typically be general fund. It wouldn't be my intention to cut that.
Okay, so you'd like them to go ahead and use the $7,000 if they can? Okay.
Hey, Christine?
Well, I would like to correct you, Dennis, when you just said commissioners seem to be in favor of using general fund money, and that would not be me.
All right.
What are you in favor of?
I am in favor of using grant monies. I would support something along, but I won't support taking general fund money. I just think our challenges next year are much too great, and every dollar has to be looked at and scrutinized very carefully, and including 7,000 of them.
Beth?
I just had a couple of questions. And I don't recall, with the EPA grant, did we know with that grant that we would be adding staff for that?
John and I had always talked about the fact that if we got the EPA grant, it would be, first, an excellent opportunity to fund the position, but John and I have been talking about a planning position for 3 years, and just not able to fund it, because of our financial condition. So yes.
And some of the things that we've talked about, and I agree that there's been additional, things put on that department, but some of the things that we're talking about, that planner wouldn't alleviate those, because due to their funding through the grant, they would be solely, or near solely grant task-oriented, right?
I would think for at least in the short term here, because we need the startup of that program, but in terms of the long term, we're going to need that person to do other things. If there's future discussions in terms of, say, the Housing Commission and land bank activities, we would see that person working on that particular area too. But certainly at the initial point here, it would be focused purely on the grant.
We have to track the money in this grant, at least through its initial period, as dedicated to that grant. So your point is a good one, Commissioner, but one of the things that I typically do at budget, and one of the things I expect I'll do with John, is 6 months after this position's in there, I will sit down with John and say, okay, how are you finding the staff allocations? Where are you finding the staff allocations to fit? One of the things John and I haven't talked about, but one of the things I expect to explore with him is he's administering this $1 million EPA grant. Why isn't 5 or 10% of his salary being utilized from the grant to supervise the grant? We will talk about those things once we get underway. Well, if 5% of his salary is supplemented with the grant, that frees up 5% of the money from the general fund that could go to the planner. So, it's John's concept, which I think is a good one, is we bring all these revenues together to provide all these services. Sometimes we're restricted in that by grant guidelines, but as we get into this, and once we get through that initial 6-month period, I would expect us to reallocate funding to where the work is actually being done. So I think it can work.
Okay, because I'm hearing we need to put more personnel resources toward this, but basically what I'm saying is the same number of people there, we're talking about 10% of one planner then.
Yes, for the other services, I see
Right.
what you're saying.
Right.
But as I said, if we move some of that EPA money to John, maybe that's 25%, you see, we'll reallocate that as the budget progresses and once we know better where their time is spent.
Okay,
Okay.
and, I'm sorry, I had a couple more.
Go ahead.
HR concurs with the recommendation? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's see, the organizational structure before and after, could you explain the differences of what the organizational structure would look like and kind of how that really accomplishes what you're trying to get at? I mean, we're
How it is
talking-
now and what?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're not only adding a person, but you're changing the structure, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And so I wanted to know how that impacts how you're leveraging your resources.
Okay, there's 4 of us currently in the department. I'm at the director, and I supervise the planning technician, Mitch Werner, right now, and brownfield coordinator, Gene Dorenzi. Gene then supervised Karen McIntyre, who's the office specialist. We reorganized that. One of the things we kind of struggled with a little bit in terms of how to reorganize this is we thought there would be some type of development division within the department, but that doesn't really achieve what I'm trying to do here based on the limited staff, and that's to get people to be able to work in various aspects of the department and not just be focused on one area. So we would now create, it would be a director, deputy director, and then from there we would have the 2 planning technicians and the planner.
And we talked, this hasn't been before the planning commission, but you would provide them an update on how this would impact any planning that they're trying to do.
Absolutely. We'll be informing all the boards that we staff.
Okay. Personally, I would feel more comfortable if we did this in conjunction with knowing how you're going to use your budget next year and those cuts and that target that Dennis has given you, how that's all going to roll together.
Okay, we have a motion and support. Can you revisit that motion for us, please?
Motion was to amend the staffing plan as stated in the memo where they would eliminate where is it? Staffing plan, addition of planner, deputy director, and planning technician, and deletion of brownfield coordinator and office specialist.
Okay, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Richardson?
Yes.
Stepka?
Yes.
Friend?
No.
Inman?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes.
Fleece?
Yes.
Max Bauer?
No.
Hooper?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Okay. Thank you,
Now
John.
we should go back and do the staffing plan amendment. Do we still have to do that, Jen, for the planner, to add the planner to the staffing plan? Or did we just do that?
No, I think we just,
No,
I
you-
think
you
we
flipped
we
them.
still have to do that.
I think we still have to do that.
So in light
we
of the
added it.
previous motion, I would make a motion to add the planner classification to the county classification plan at grade 1.
Second.
Moved by Beth Friend and second by Ross Richardson.
Was it?
Great.
Grade I, sorry.
All right. think we got it. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we're on to administration.
Chris, do you want to come up? The memo is self-explanatory. We did provide you with guidelines for a rural representative, but at this point, we wanted you to be aware, I may have confused you, there is still an opening for a rural representative on the BPW. I'm sorry?
That was the...
And here's the action that Chris is passing out, so.
You may have confused us. There's a joke in there somewhere, but I'm just not sure.
I probably did.
Some of
let's
us
say
are
it that
easily
way.
confused, though.
So I guess we wanted you to be aware there still is that vacancy, and I don't know where that whole idea of reorganization is at, but they are one member short at this time, correct, Chris?
Correct. To clear up that confusion, I just handed out the copy of the agenda that took place in May, and so that's what actually happened. We were asking that a rural representative be chosen, and then last month it decided there was some additional information requested for the next month, and then after that, you still went ahead and said we would like to continue the appointment, or not make an appointment, thinking that it was already filled. So, we have a rural representative appointment that has not been filled, and I guess that I'm asking, in consideration of what you said last month, was that you were going to wait until the BPW was reorganized. Should we choose a rural representative by going ahead and putting forth the committee, choosing a committee to do that? We had 4 people, as you see on that sheet of paper, that did show some interest.
Well, it's
Yeah.
questionable how much interest they show.
Reluctantly, in some cases, yeah.
In the meeting I was at, I'm not sure they had much interest.
I heard more disinterested interest, but whatever.
Or the other thing is would we like to reappoint Marv and just ask him to continue to serve until a reappointment is either made by the board or until the BPW is reorganized?
And Sonny.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to appoint Marv Radke through 2010 in order, or until through the reorganization of the Board of Public Works as the rural representative. I was at the, well, let's do the motion in a second, then we'll have discussion.
Second.
Okay, a motion and second by Inman. Sonny, again.
Okay, I was at the annual townships meeting when this was discussed, and, Karen Rosa was kind of thrown out there, and she has expressed to me on multiple occasions that she doesn't have any interest, and neither does Paul Biondo. Pat Paul, representing Blair Township, is now a water and sewer township, so I'm not sure that truly qualifies as a rural representative. So I would have some concerns about doing that, at least until I see how the reorganization of the Board of Public Works actually in fact happens. So, I would like to see us, normally we would have appointed Marv Radke for a 3-year term when we did it in 2009, and we chose not to, expecting that the Board of Public Work reorganization would in fact have happened, and it hasn't happened yet. So, I think it's appropriate that we have Marv continue until such time as the reorganization, or, 2011, when it would normally be scheduled to, because his term would have normally expired December 31st of 2011.
That is
Because we
correct.
appointed him to 2009. We haven't done anything in 2010, so he's been doing 6 months for nothing, or, without an appointment.
And he has been
And
attending
he has been
meetings.
attending
Yes.
and partaking in the discussion.
Ross?
Didn't Marv not want to serve anymore?
No.
That's not the
Marv's
case?
still interested unless someone else was
Chris,
wanting to serve more.
did you talk with
And
Marv?
I talked to Marv, and he's very enthusiastic about serving out.
Have we ever advertised for this position?
We have not. What happened was the rural townships posted it, and I think they were, Glenn had asked the Township Association when he talked to, I think he sent a letter maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago, and I think that the townships were going to either present it to their specific boards, or maybe put it in their newsletter.
Do we have a definition, Dennis, or Chris, whoever can answer the question, of
That's where
what
this all
a
started.
rural township representative is?
Well, I recommended one to you last month. I don't have it here with me.
Is it part of that?
Is it in the minutes that you just passed out?
It's actually anything that does not border Traverse City.
That's what the current.
That's what the current
Okay,
is, and we have not
But
changed
does the
that.
candidate have to be a member of one of these township boards, or just
No.
someone who lives in one of these?
Representative of them. It could be a member of the board.
And I think I had suggested to you that it would be anyone who was not participating in the sewer and water component of the Board of Public Works. So in other words, in that case, the only change would be Blair would be, because they would not be
Right.
considered rural anymore because they're through Garfield.
Yeah, but Blair, I think Sonny misspoke himself. Blair's water is independent. We're not hooked to the water system.
The sewer system is.
Just the sewer.
Yeah, well, that's what, when I said that, what I meant is anybody who participates in an aspect of the sewer and water system, not both, is what I was suggesting, but you took no action on it. So right now, it's anything that doesn't border the city.
That's sufficiently vague.
Which, well,
I'm sorry, Brian.
no, my only comment is, should we be advertising this before we just, go ahead and appoint Marv? Reappoint Marv, I mean.
You know, Chris, I don't want to confuse this, but didn't we also send a letter out to all the township boards?
We didn't. The township supervisor did.
Township Association.
Right, I'm sorry, Township Association. We sent a letter, or I've been emailing back and forth to Glenn Lyle, and that was the response that you have in front of you from Glenn, which, then again was at the Township Association meeting, which everybody...
See, no, my comment here is that it seems like we should look further afield than just the township boards, because not everybody is, hooked into the township boards and knows what's going on that way. I mean, if we have a position, we're looking for a member of the public, that's all.
Chris?
I would agree with Commissioner Richardson. I do believe we need to advertise, and that certainly does not mean that I don't appreciate Mr. Radke, because I certainly do. He served, those meetings are not the easiest meetings to sit through, but I do believe we should advertise.
Sonny?
I think we need to also remember, though, this is a rural township representative. We have general citizens at large members on this board already, and we advertised and interviewed for those positions. This is a designated rural township representative.
That goes back to my question about the definition. Are we looking for a member of a rural township board, or just somebody who lives in a rural township?
I think someone is stipulated by them.
Tell me more.
I think that the definition in the rules is township board or their designee.
Right.
So I think it has to go through one of those the rural township boards, as far as, they would be the one, even if they wanted to have a citizen represent them, it would be through their, they would give us that recommendation.
I don't believe this is a general citizen at large position that we would normally advertise and interview for.
That's not the way it was in the Board of Public Works rules.
Do we know that they sent that letter out to the townships for sure?
I do not know.
Okay.
I know that he said that he brought it up at a Township Association meeting.
We were there.
Yeah.
Right, but we don't know that he sent a letter out, because I guess I'm trying to
I don't know if it was
distinguish who-
advertised in their papers.
Okay. I just trying to distinguish who happens to show up at their township meeting versus getting the word out to those township boards. So we know that was brought up at the Township Association meeting. We don't know that there was any communication to the township boards, for sure.
I don't know, because quite frankly, this started back in January, and I didn't go backtrack at that far.
The other thing was the motion to appoint him through the original term, through, what was it supposed to be?
December 31st of 2011 would be the completion of the
So we're
3
basically
years.
just reinstituting the last 2 years of that original term. Okay.
Okay, now Richard.
Going back to definitions of rural and of a rural township, that a metro being one that contacts Traverse City doesn't hold up. We may have to change the definition because Acme Township sure doesn't touch Traverse City. So your definition of a rural township might have to be defined as one that's not in the BPW.
That's why I
I mean, that makes
recommended that.
sense.
You know, I just think, but if we're going to reorganize 6 months from now, there's really no sense in making a change.
Do you really?
Was that a joke? Was I making a joke there?
Do you really think?
That Garfield Township meeting I went to was like 2-3
Yeah.
years ago.
I do
And
believe,
our
though,
meeting,
that...
we didn't get much further at ours several months ago.
Well,
You about to vote, or can I get a...
Yes, we're about to vote. Okay, we have a motion on the floor to appoint Mark Radke to continuation of his term to 2011. Have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Richardson?
Yes.
Stepka?
Yes.
Friend?
Yes.
Inman?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Fleece?
Yes.
Max Bauer?
No.
Thomas? Hooper?
Yes. Okay, and now we can move on.
Chris?
Updates and appointments.
The updates on the boards and committees, I just wanted to let you know where we were at with that, so that we could, just to give you an update of what's going on. Board of Public Works, we took care of. Northern Lake CMH is still, we still have an opening there, but
Also,
Nina's a more...
I'm sorry. I just
go ahead
talked
and
to
update
them
that.
yesterday,
Oh,
the
okay.
secretary, and the person who was resigning has actually ended up being in town
Right.
longer than anticipated, so she's still serving as a board member within her term. And I'm guessing they're still looking for somebody, as I understand, so we'll kind of know when she's officially left and when they've found someone.
That's correct.
Okay.
That was the information I got as well. Parks and Rec, we have 2 additional resignations from Parks and Rec in the last couple of months, or month and a half. And I'm requesting an ad hoc committee to review the applications and hold interviews as necessary on that particular one. And then we also have 2 boards which meet very, very infrequently, who have vacancies as of June 30th, because their terms do not, like some of the other boards, fall at the end of the year. They fall at mid-year. Quite frankly, I'd be happy to advertise for these. They're on our listing of always having boards available, and I think some of this with your committee application group will change. I mean, that will take care of some of these problems, but hospital finance, quite frankly, I think has not met for 3 or 4 years. Dean's the chairman of that. I was going to verify that. 3 or 4 years since hospital finance has met, and we do
Probably
not
2.
anticipate anything for quite a long time within the seeable future. Farmland preservation doesn't seem like it's doing anything. Larry's on that one.
I can make a remark on that if you want.
Yeah, so I'm just kind of wondering if we shouldn't go ahead and do reappointments on those, because these people, even though they serve for a term, they may attend one meeting during that whole term. So I don't know if we want to re-advertise for something that's not an active board.
Larry?
Just to refresh everyone's memory on the Farmland Preservation Board, that was set up, that was set up basically to help townships that have money available in their fund or have a millage, as Acme does, to make application to the state for matching funds for the Farmland Preservation Board. The state subsequently, after the formation of the committee, did not budget any money for matching money to help local units of government expand the Farmland Preservation Board. So that's the reason why we have not met. The bylaws of the committee indicate that we have an annual meeting of which we just meet and review, is there a current status change in the state, those kinds of things. So Wayne Clatter, as you know, has been the one of the representatives, and Acme is the only township in Grand Traverse County that has an active farmland preservation process in place, and they actually have a millage in place. Peninsula does too. So my recommendation on farmlands is since Acme is one of the two, that we at least reappoint Wayne Clatter to the board.
Motion to reappoint Wayne Clatter to the Farmland Preservation for a 3-year term through June 30th, 2013.
Support.
We have a motion to support. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Okay, motion carries. Ross?
Motion to reappoint Dale Sterrett to the Hospital Finance Board to a 5-year term expiring June 30th, 2015.
Support.
We have a motion to support.
Chris, do we know if Dale's still interested in staying?
Okay, he seems to be interested. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Chris?
Regarding Parks and Rec, I would like to make a suggestion. We recently had some interviews, and I believe Commissioner Stepka, Commissioner Friend, myself, and Commissioner Wheelock were on that committee. Rather than ask, and the meeting was not videotaped, rather than ask the interviewees that we already interviewed to come back and do it again for new commissioners, may I suggest that we just ask the commissioners that served last time to interview any additional applicants and then make a choice.
And review those.
Is that a motion?
that are
Yes, it
still-
is.
Second.
That's a good idea.
That's a great idea.
Okay, we have a motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Okay, so that takes care of the ad hoc committee for
Assuming
that.
you're willing to do that.
Real quick question on
drafted,
that. Chris,
Sonny.
do we know of the people that we have interviewed the past time, and even there was a large slate of them the time before, do we know which of those are still interested or on file?
I have not contacted them because I didn't want to do something not knowing how we were going to
Okay.
proceed.
Okay.
So you will
But I
vote-
will go ahead and contact them, find out which ones that we interviewed are still interested, see if there's any additional ones. I believe that one of the ladies was unable to make it at the last minute, so maybe she can come in. And then we have a couple of new ones, so
And we'll throw them on the
set up a
website
time.
too.
And if you can put those resumes together for us again and just,
We'll set up a
because we
date.
can certainly review the resumes of the people
Yep.
we previously interviewed rather than asking them to come in again. You know, we've had some pretty qualified candidates the last couple rounds of interviews, so.
That certainly sounds like the most efficient way to do it. Anything else as far as that goes?
I have nothing.
Okay, let's move on to the administrator's report. Thank you, Christine.
I'm going to give you an update on a few items. First of all, I met with Conservation Resource Alliance representatives and Ben Bifus from the city 2 days ago. The work plan has been, the work plan from the Army Corps of Engineers, the draft has been received. It's 95% done. It is, I guess on first blush, it's, in my opinion, much too long, the timeline to get the work done. We're going to be looking at our work plan based on the Army Corps work plan, which is what has been the holdup, and we expect within the next 2 months we'll have a work plan for the dam removals to you so that you can see the timeline on that. An update in terms of the Peterson equipment. Much of the equipment is out. He has an engineer looking at the runner, how he can pull the runners at the Sabin Dam to make sure that it, he has a concern that it will deteriorate the foundation and the structure. He has an engineer that's looking at it, and we will be getting that report to our people to look at to make sure that in fact that is the case. But he knows he still has to remove that. In terms of the trash rakes, he has an agreement before him with the Board of Light and Power has sent him to, because they are going to assist him in the removal of the trash rakes, and so they're waiting for the signature on that. So most of the equipment that he can remove at this time is out with those exceptions, and we continue to kind of keep after him to get those things done as soon as possible.
Are we making any plans on replacing the trash rakes, or?
We are, that was my next item. We have come up with a plan for, we won't need a trash rake at Sabin, from what our staff says. We still will need some kind of a system at Boardman, and we're looking at two options. We may have to spend a little bit of money from the budget that we have for dams to have a permit application prepared. We will need a permit from the DEQ, MDEQ, MDNRE, whatever it is. We may need a permit for, depending on how we go about that. If we decide to put some kind of a fence system 50 yards upstream from the dam to catch the debris, we're told that probably will require a permit. So we're in the process of looking at that now. We've got some cost estimates that I've talked to you about before, and I think what we'll do is if we need to get a permit, we'll probably hire Wade Trim, who's already under contract with the Board of Light and Power, with the Board of Public Works, to do the design and the permit application. But I'm trying to get costs together on what this might look like for the permitting process, if in fact it's needed. Right now, we had a call in, I haven't heard back from George, but I asked George to recall Jim Pulowski from the DEQ to make sure that a permit was going to be necessary and to describe to him what we were talking about doing as a replacement for the trash rakes. So that's where we're at.
Ross, you have a comment?
Yeah, I had a question going back to the Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, is it such that what they're giving us is not usable because of the time frame, or?
No, it's usable, but the initial time frame, and this is just a draft, is in the 8 to 10 year time frame.
Okay, why are they taking so long?
Well, we're in the process of questioning some of the aspects of their plan at this point in time, and they have not responded to that yet. But the design and the engineering is it's either a 3 1/4 or a 3.5 year timeline from now. I don't know if that's the result of their annual appropriations from the federal government that makes it stretch out that long. So frankly, what we're looking at now is there seems to be some grant funding available, and we don't have to do this all one way or all the other way. And so right now, we're looking at some grant funding that may allow us to breach one of the dams more quickly without using the Army Corps of Engineers. I can tell you that one of the big delays with the Army Corps of Engineers, which is a question I asked the other day because I think it's a delay in any event, the NEPA process, which is the big public process, takes a year. They're saying takes almost a year and a half to do. Our question to them was, why can't the NEPA process be going at the same time that the engineering process is going, to cut that down from 3.5 years to year and a half or 2 years?
So they're claiming that we have to engineer first and then do the NEPA process?
That's what we think, Commissioner, but we can't really tell from, they didn't get into that level of specific detail.
I mean, basically, we just have sort of a timeline from them.
That's
rather than anything specific about what happens when.
Well, we have a 100-page draft document from them that is being reviewed by the CRA staff. I have not reviewed it myself yet, but the indication I got from Amy Byer and Nate Winkler of the CRA staff is that it's difficult to determine what's involved specifically in those time frames and how they might be condensed. And when I asked the question, is this a result of their concern for how money might be appropriated by the federal government, because they've been allocating about $500,000 or $600,000 to this project annually, and if that's the case, this could be stretched out longer just because the money's not there.
Yeah.
They say they can't tell that from the draft. So we're putting together a list of questions for the Army Corps to ask them to look at it. But, some of these dams can be breached in the $800,000-900,000 range is what we're being told. Now that's removal of buildings and breaching. That's not necessarily taking out the walls. And if that's the case and that kind of grant money is there, we are looking at the possibility of moving forward with one of those as opposed to waiting for the timeline of the Army Corps. My whole thing from the beginning, and I told this to them and to Ben and I agree on this, from the city, my whole thing is I don't want to lose. We know with the Army Corps of Engineers, 65% of the cost of all of this can be taken care of. And of course, I don't want to walk away from 65% of the cost of this. And so this is a balancing act in a way. We want to balance this in a way that we can utilize every one of those federal dollars that we can. But I just think that 8 to 10 years is not an acceptable time frame to be working on this, and so we're reevaluating that with how revenues come in. But of course, then if someone says to me, "Here, we're going to give you $800,000 to do this project," the other thing I go back and say to them is, "But if we hold that $800,000 and use it in conjunction with taking out all 3 dams, does that go towards our 35% match, and does it not count towards our match if we just take out one? Those are the kinds of questions we have to ask to make sure that we're utilizing every dollar to the best advantage we can.
Sonny?
Dennis, I guess my questions are, you know, the big public process, can they give us any recognition for the whole Boardman River Dams process that we've already done? We had a 2-year public process in this thing already, or 3 years, you know, so I think we need to get some recognition for that, you know, and I think there's a lot of questions here. You know, my one concern about, you know, money's available, maybe we can breach one of the dams. I'm very confident that if we breach the dam, we will never be able to get funding to complete the removal.
Right. All right, 2 questions there. The first question, the answer to the first question is that the answer is, under the present conditions, we are not able to get any credit for any money that we spent in the study, nor are we able to get any credit for any money we spend now until such a time that we sign an agreement with them that pledges 35% reimbursement for all the work they do. And that won't be done until the time that the complete design is done. And that's kind of our safeguard. We can get all the way through to the design, they can design the whole removal and give that to us, and we could say, no, we don't want to do any work with you, and we have no responsibility to pay them back for any of the work that they've done up until that point. So that's kind of how this has been planned. But under the present guidelines, we get no credit for any of that. We have talked with Senator Levin's office and Dave Camp's office. There have been situations where legislation has been introduced to allow credit on other projects for some of the past expenditures that went towards the project. And Senator Levin's staff is working with us to try to introduce that kind of legislation to give us credit for that money, which would probably take care of most of the 35%. So that's the status of that. But again, that's a timing thing. But yes, they are working on that. Your second question was?
My concern about breaching the dams, whether we would ever be able to get funding to complete the removal.
I have always told you that my feeling was the same, that we didn't want to just breach the dams because I was concerned that we wouldn't get any money. And you're right. I had an interesting conversation with them yesterday. What was included in the breaching cost of the estimate that I saw 2 days ago included removal of all the buildings, reinstituting the walls, the earthen walls. Now, this is not Boardman. Boardman is a much more complicated project, but like at Sabin and at Brownbridge, I guess I'm kind of, they're changing my opinion a little bit on that. In other words, if they take out all the buildings and remove all of the hazards, and the earthen walls stay there and are rock rip-wrapped and that kind of thing, there may not be a need to remove those earthen walls. And so let me give you an example. The project that I saw, the estimate to remove the earthen walls, and I think this was Brownbridge, was $9 million. Okay, the estimate to remove the buildings and breach the dam was about $900,000. So, based on that, if we can stabilize the walls, if there's no silt being lost in those, if there's ways to address that from an engineering standpoint that protects the environmental issues and still removes all of the hazards that we're concerned about, that might be a much better alternative for us.
I guess the question becomes is how they're going to define breaching, because I've seen, when we went through the process, I've seen pictures where they basically cut a V in it, and the buildings were still standing, the masonry was still standing, and it was like, wait a minute, this doesn't do, then we're still responsible for buildings, and we're going to have vandalism and all kinds of security issues.
I think the total estimate for the breaching that they talked about was in the $1.6 million, $1.7 million range. Don't hold me to that. It was right around that. $900,000 to actually move to do the construction work. But that was much more than what I had the same opinion you did, that it cut a V in it and we walk away. No, this was taking out buildings, removing all those kind of nuisances that we were concerned about, and just leaving the walls with appropriate erosion control. And it even included funding in that $1.6 million or $1.7 million for restoration and for a management plan. So
that might be an acceptable alternative. I don't want to see us just cut a V and walk away, and that was my concern. But if they're removing buildings and doing those things, that might be an alternative that saves us a whole lot of money. And so I was kind of encouraged by that. Okay, the other question, I'm going to be meeting with the city and Board of Light and Power tomorrow. Board of Light and Power is going to be asking us how important we think maintaining the SCADA emergency flood system is. Now, the situation, I'm still piecing this together, but the situation is this. We are now going to have both Sabin and Boardman dams wide open.
You don't need them.
The water's going to flow as the water flows. Remember about 4 weeks ago, we had 3 inches of rain?
It was right through.
Remember, it was on a Friday night, we had a ton of rain. And it was 2 3/4 inches, just went right through, there was no problem. Well, Board of Light and Power is going to come and see us tomorrow, Ben and I, and say, listen, do you feel a need to continue this SCADA system, this water level system, or can we close that down? And I guess I'd like your opinion on that before I move forward with it.
Don't need it.
I don't know what purpose they serve any longer. I think that's what he's going to tell us.
Do we
because
have
it's flow,
fluctuations?
Free flow. The fluctuation is just as the water falls, and then as long as it takes it to run through, but maybe a foot. It's not 8 feet or 10 feet, because everything's wide open. I don't really see the need. If the engineers look at it and say, this serves no purpose any longer, I just want to make sure the board is aware and okay with that to say, we're no longer going to do this.
That's my question, as someone with an engineering background.
Yeah, well, that's what we would do. First, I would get something from Board of Light and Power, and then I would ask Ross Childs to look at it as well, who's an engineer. I might even bounce it off. You know who I might actually talk to? I might talk to Otwell Mobby, Roger. Roger has hydrology background, and I might just make a call to Roger and see if he sees there's any point in this.
Larry?
Dennis, I'm just wondering, since the regulators that regulate I believe from the state side was very helpful in trying to determine the, safety issues that were brought up previously, and you had addressed that. I wonder if they would have some input as to that issue, and I think it would be good to run it by them, and just as an option for
I think that's a good idea. I think we're required to run it by Jim Pulaski.
When you have those engineers take a look at it, make sure they give you a letter that signs it PE after their name.
Okay, they don't like to sign those letters, but I'll see. Maybe I'll get a letter from Jim Pulowski that says that's acceptable.
You could ask me. I've been running Duck Lake Dam for 35 years.
You got a PE?
Okay. All right, just a couple of budget notes. We're going to talk a little bit more about budget, but I did want to give you some idea, some of the things we're hearing from departments, just so that you have this. We'll talk about them over the next couple of weeks. Some of the departments have talked to us about the idea of changing the hours of operation of the buildings, instead of from 8 to 5 to go to 8:30 to 5, and cut salaries by, half hour a day. So I'm just giving you some flavor of what I'm hearing. Several of the departments are talking about voluntary hours, employees offering to work less hours and not take pay for it. Taking 5 days off without pay, those kinds of things are being talked about. We've we're looking into a possibility of not offering early retirement programs, but offering a severance program where we might offer employees some amount of money to leave county employment and not fill the job, which would be the way we would save money. And so we'd call it some kind of a severance package as opposed to an early retirement package. And evidently there are several employees that have expressed some interest in that kind of thing. And then the other thing is each employee gets some personal hours, and they can use them during the year, and if they don't use them during the year, they get paid for them in December. Some have talked about the idea of using those personal hours as opposed to taking them in pay, which would reduce down the cost at the end of the year. So those are some of the ideas that I've heard so far. Some of the departments are talking about joining clerical staffs. There's been some initial discussion about that, and they're kind of working through that. Generally, I think people have, I think at the meeting, Beth and Chris were there. I think they were more shocked than they were anything at the scope of it. But I think the discussion since that time has been generally constructive. There are some places that it's just going to be very difficult, but everybody is kind of working on it. Dean's phone is ringing off the hook. He's getting 10, 15 calls a day. From
Who was
people.
shocked? Who was
Pardon?
shocked? They were shocked?
I think they were a little bit
Oh, the
shocked
department
by
heads.
it.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
because there was
I wasn't
very
sure
little
you were-
screaming or yelling or gnashing of teeth.
To be honest, I showed up just in case there was any egg throwing at you. I was gonna,
You were gonna
become a
what?
I was
Say,
gonna come become a
"Him."
target too.
So anyway, everybody's working on it. The only one we still have to talk to is Circuit Court, because they didn't have a representative there. The prosecutor wasn't there, but he came in and met with me, and we went over the whole budget issue. And he's aware of the situation. We still have to get with Circuit Court and make sure that they know what's going on. You haven't talked to them yet, have you?
No.
We have to do that. We have to do that the next day or so. So that's kind of what's going on there at this point in time. Today, earlier, you approved the district court operating agreement, but evidently there's still a little glitch. I had met with the county administrators from Antrim and Leelanau, and Dean met with us last week. We talked about a number of issues. We talked about jail. We talked about dispatch, 911 cooperation.
Community corrections.
Community corrections was a big issue that we talked about. And the main issue we talked about. Oh,
Well,
budget.
the court
We wanted
budgets.
them to be aware of what we're doing with the budget because it impacts both of their counties. So we had a meeting last week to talk about this, and there are still a couple of issues with that district court operating agreement. So while you approved it here as it is, I wanted you to be aware there is going to be a meeting held in the next 5 to 7 days. They're working out the details with the county administrators and Carol to try to get the rest of it resolved. Evidently, Antrim still has an issue. And so this may change before it gets to you at the board in 2 weeks, and I wanted you to be aware of that. Okay?
Larry?
If you would allow me, with regard to Dennis's discussion about the budget, I'd like to correct myself in terms of, I guess, some of the things I may have said regarding the commissioner's budget. Dick and I have met with Dean and Dennis, and we're working with Katie. There are a number of areas, now that we're digging behind the numbers of the commissioner's budget, that has always had surpluses in many areas that we've never gotten to the extent where we've gotten into those surpluses. And we've just continued those surpluses in terms of our budget every year. So we've located a number of items in our budget that there are surpluses available that, based on whatever our current activity is in terms of per diem, travel, those kinds of things. It's our preliminary determination that if we maintain our current activity level in those line items, we should be okay. One of the major factors that we forgot to do, and we just are now getting in the preliminary numbers, is we forgot to remove the, as you know, we've downgraded our health care coverage, and we forgot to go back and recalculate the numbers for the reduction of the spouse and the family coverage. And then we forgot to go back and add the 10% copay that we put in. So I just want to let you know, at least on a preliminary basis right now, Katie's continuing to re-verify the information in our budget. It appears as though we're going to be able to meet our 10% goal in the commissioner's budget. Dick and I just want to review it one more time with staff, and then what we would like to do is just provide you a copy of our current budget and what the amended budget would look like for 2011 for the commissioner's budget. But it appears as though if we continue our same pattern in terms of per diem, a couple of us going to MAC or NACO or whatever, and the reduction in benefits on the insurance side and the 10% copay, it looks like we're going to be able to fit within our 10% goal. So I just wanted to let you know that and correct myself. The other thing I wanted to correct myself in is when we met with Dean and Dennis, we are getting the cost allocation on the audit. We're not solely covering the cost on that audit. Is that there is a cost allocation credit to that, which we didn't originally see in the budget. So I just want to let you know things are looking fairly bright on that side. So more details to come.
Beth?
Larry, well, that's good. That's good news. I appreciate you looking into that, and that's good. But I would say if we meet that 10% without really changing anything, that's beneficial. But then I would also say, as we've talked about how some departments maybe should be more at like 7% and some should be more like 15% or whatever, maybe we could just challenge ourselves to look beyond that 10% and see where we could cut. So that alleviates for some other departments. So maybe you could you and Dick could talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, we've gotten into that a little bit, and let us come back to you on the final draft on that. Some of the challenges, for example, you know, in terms of some legal fees that we're capturing for other departments, you know, some of those things we can't distribute. We just agreed that we would fund it. So we're getting very close to taking the supplementals and that we're not using and the cost reduction for the benefit structure. We're very close to the 10%. So what I was going to suggest is that, you know, even in line what you were thinking is my discussion with staff is that, you know, the worst case situation, I guess we're trying to ask all the departments to come up with is a 10% reduction, and then we would have this pool of money that if we needed to, we could take a look at how that would be distributed. So that could be, it could be an issue that we can take a look at with regard to our budget, but it seems as though we're going to be very close in terms of trying to maintain our current activity with a reduction in benefits that we're going to be pretty close to. There'll be a couple sacrifices that are in the budget right now, like we have some membership dues that we pay under the commissioner's budget, like for the Convention Bureau and the Chamber of Commerce and those kinds of things that we have yet to talk about. So, but I understand where you're coming from. What Katie's doing right now is, and Dean is doing, is they're helping us go behind the numbers, and we're going to actually find out what those numbers mean in terms of what we're spending on and the pattern, not only for this year but last year, and come back with a recommendation. But yeah, we'll look hard at every number.
Yeah, because as we see, departments have to cut services and cut employees, and yet we're able to meet that 10% without changing anything. I think we could challenge ourselves more to.
Well, the only thing I would point out is that we did make some major moves on the reduction of commissioner benefits. That was a decision that the board made in terms of scaling back. So we have made those some of those decisions already. But
Chris?
You know, Larry, I don't know how many, and one of the things I'm going to recommend you take a look at is travel. I know we put in the budget, and it's in our bylaws, that, you know, commissioners can go to NACO if they want. Perhaps we could agree just to send one commissioner. I know you're already committed as a chairman of a NACO committee, but perhaps we could just take a look and I mean, I'm certainly willing to say, you know, no, I'm not going to go. And maybe other commissioners would be willing to do the same, and you know, and just rely on you to bring the information back to us. It's just an idea to toss out there.
Okay, we'll look into that. Cool. But I just wanted to give you an update on it that we've been working on it. We'll get back to you.
Okay, Dennis, where are we now?
Okay. Two more quick issues. First, resource recovery. I met with Bob Osterhout yesterday. You know, their board has taken action to look at the financing mechanism that provides their operational cost, for their operational cost. They've passed a motion to say they wanted curbside recycling available to everyone by the end of this year, I believe it is. And they've also said that they want the recycling bins removed by the end of this year. Now, the contract is up for recycling by the end of this year, and Bob came and talked to you a couple weeks ago. Bob and I talked yesterday, and what I suggested to him is that he needs to put together a transition plan that he could bring back to you and to his Resource Recovery Council that would kind of lay out the details of this. You know, one of the things that's being discussed is getting away from eliminating the landfill surcharge, which we've talked about for years, but yet no one's identified a viable alternative that, you know, to fund whatever programs we will continue to do. Some commissioners have expressed an idea that for the rural areas particularly, just eliminating the bins immediately will be problematic, and there needs to be a timeline so that a plan can be put together. And so I've asked Bob to look at that and put together a transition plan for you, and we talked about it in some detail yesterday about how that might look, and hopefully get the boards to adopt a transition plan that would allow for smooth change over to something different. And so Bob is working on that. I'm hopeful that it'll be something that you can support when we get it here to you.
Great.
Dennis, I guess my comment to that would be, I would suggest that our number one item in that transition plan is to notify all of the townships that effective December 31st, Grand Traverse County wouldn't be funding those drop-off sites. Some of these boards are in the process of drawing their budget. Some of them are in calendar years, some of them are not. They may choose to fund it or group together and fund the drop-off site if they choose. But I think the number one thing is to identify to them that, you know, we will not be funding those drop-off sites as of December 31st. You know, rather than the number one thing about a transition plan is as you eliminate them, you need to help them notify them. Well, if the decision's been made in May to eliminate those drop-off sites, which was when the vote was taken, then we should be notifying them now that those drop-offs will go away December 31st.
We haven't?
Rather than wait
have?
until December.
I
What?
don't think we have. Have we not?
I don't know that. I don't know that anyone's been notified that those are scheduled to go away. You know,
I know there's been discussion with the townships, and Bob is still going to the townships discussing these. But I guess I am looking at, Bob and I are looking at the idea of perhaps going from 8 down to, you know, maybe 4, and then, you know, and then 3 months later down to 2, and then eliminating them, you know, over a period of time. And there's a couple things that I just can't get into, but that are in the works that may pick up some of the slack from that and make this easier to do. But I guess, you know, when we bring that to you, if that's not your choice, if you want them just gone December 31st, kind of cold turkey, we can do that. But I'll make sure Bob has everyone notified that that's the action that's been taken so far, so that people are aware.
Well, and the other piece of that, you know, and it's a separate issue, but, you know, we had a little brief discussion last week that in your proposed 2011 budget, we'll be eliminating fireworks funding and those kind of things. I would suggest that we notify those people that we're making those appropriations to as soon as possible as they start to prepare for 2011. I know that the Veterans Coalition, for example, was $8,000 short on July 4th, and George was out. You know, I gave him a hard time about panhandling in front of the Cherry Festival entrance to come up with monies to help cover their costs for this year. So they already know they were short this year. If we're not making an appropriation to them next year, we need to notify them soon so they can make decisions.
I'm concerned about sending that notification
Until
based
the
on a
budget's
recommendation by Dean and I. I want to see what the board does with it.
Okay. Ross?
Getting back to this decision by Resource Recovery, has that ever been ratified by the Board of Public Works?
Yes.
By the Board of Public Works, has it?
I believe the Board of Public Works approved the recommendations.
I guess I wasn't sure if they had or not. But, you know, the contract is good through December 31st. You know, I guess I believe that transitioning away from that might be more appropriate than just eliminating them all December 31st. But Bob is looking at that issue. But, you know, I mean, when I say that, I'm saying maybe by June 30th of 2011, you know, we transition away. But also he's looking at the funding options and how we might address the funding options as well.
The funding for Resource Recovery.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, because that's obviously, you know, especially if, you know, if the tipping fee is reduced or eliminated, you know, how are we going to pay for Resource Recovery?
That's correct.
Remember, I tend to remind you again, the contract for the recycling drop-off sites is between the Board of Public Works and American Waste, not this board.
Right.
Although this board does establish the search.
Yeah, and that's why I suggested to Bob that a transition plan should come to you, because while that decision on taking away the recycling bins can be done without you, you fund them. And so I want a transition plan that you can support and that Resource Recovery Council can support and Board of Public Works ultimately.
There was also discussion, I mean, there's been discussion a number of times, but I thought a couple months ago, and I should have looked this up in the minutes, that in terms of Resource Recovery being transferred from the Board of Public Works to us directly. And I had the sense that most of the board seemed to think that was a good idea, but is that anywhere in process, or?
It requires a completely different intergovernmental agreement. The intergovernmental
that was the
agreement that's
holdup.
in place, and the question still becomes whether or not the townships are going to re-ratify the intergovernmental agreement between the townships and the Board of Public Works. Now, should they not tend to ratify that, then the county has no authority by which to have any decision over it anyway.
I did ask Scott Howard to look at the issue and to tell us what would be necessary to legally transfer if the intergovernmental agreements stay in place or are modified. Could they be modified in a way that they're between the county board and the townships or the local units of government? I also said, asked him to look at, is there a way to just simply modify the agreement to transfer that responsibility from Board of Public Works to the county board? And so he's looking at both those issues for us.
The real difficult discussion becomes what happens if some of the townships opt out of the intergovernmental agreement and some of them don't. You know, for example, if a couple, three of the small townships choose to, you know, continue to figure that the Board of Public Works or Grand Traverse County, whoever is going to do it, is going to administer this program for them. There is no provision in the existing intergovernmental agreement or Ordinance 17, which the intergovernmental agreement applies the enforcement to the county or to the Board of Public Works. Why? There's no provision in those documents to allow the Board of Public Works or the Grand Traverse County to get out of the program. The sole cancellation is with the townships. There's no provision by which the Board of Public Works can say, no, we're not going to do this anymore.
But, okay, so the Board of Public Works doesn't have the ability?
They do not have the ability in that document to opt out. The sole discretion to opt out, it lies with the townships.
Well, that's a separate contract.
I suspect that as more townships find out what kind of a deal that Blair Township just got with waste management, I think you're going to see a bunch of townships drop out and do the same thing because they're getting contracts that are about a half of what it costs to haul trash from the rest of the county. So their bids come in from waste management about half. It was $10 or something, wasn't it?
$10.65.
So I think you're going to see a bunch of them drop out at the end of the year because, you know, if they pick up on this, it's.
My concern is what we do when 6 of the townships drop out, we've got 7 of them left.
Well, yeah, but the voters have to approve it in Blair, and if they don't, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of people, I think are gonna vote no.
Well, I don't know.
Oh, Commissioner Fleece, I have to tell you, after our last meeting, when you said that was gonna cost you money, and we talked about how many people don't have garbage pickup, and I thought, how many people don't have garbage pickup? So I called a friend and said, hey, did you know you can get the same rate that I have, which we have a discounted rate through our neighborhood? And she said, oh, I don't have garbage pickup. I go in with my neighbor on garbage pickup.
Oh, no.
I laughed because I thought I was like, oh.
That's something no one's supposed to know.
That vote's going to be on the 3rd?
Yeah, August 3rd in the primary.
I was out at the Peninsula Township Board meeting last night. George McBath was scheduled to do a presentation on Commission on Aging millage, and he asked me to go in his place. And one of the items that they talked about last night and asked me some questions on was the fact that they are going in with the city and Acme
And East
Township.
Bay, they voted on Monday.
Did they? East Bay, all right, to do an RFP for trash service. You know, I don't know whether or not Peninsula Township, and I should have probably mentioned it, whether Peninsula Township is asking the RFP be written so that they can include a drop-off, because I know they really like the drop-off, you know, for their wine bottles. But you're exactly right, because Rob Manigault, the supervisor of Peninsula Township, did say, you know, this is what Blair got, and they're interested in at least looking at an RFP.
Yeah. I think Sonny's scenario could very well come true. I think we could end up with 4 or 5 very rural townships that say we want to continue, and the dilemma is going to be you have services that the county will still provide that will be countywide, and you could certainly have a countywide funding mechanism to take care of those. But if there's specific services for townships, you can't really justify using countywide surcharge for particular townships. So that's going to be a challenge. Well, we'll have some more discussion when we bring that transition plan to you.
They won't let them pay for it.
The last issue, this is just a quick mention, Central Dispatch, Jamel is out on leave temporarily while her mother's very ill, and so she's taking care of her mother for some time, and Jason is Jason Torrey, the deputy, is running the department, and he and I are in regular contact. I just want you to be aware that she's gone.
Are they
for a
short?
while. Pardon?
Are they shorthanded?
No, I think they're at full staff right now. That's all.
Okay, going to unfinished business. Septic treatment facility update on the business plan.
Well, there's not really much to update. You can see Dean's letter that I asked him to send to Ross to clarify the fact. Ross had been talking about the fact that, they could pay the $58,000 and...
Ross Childs?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I should have clarified that. Ross Child had been suggesting that. And Dean has indicated they do not have the funding in there to pay that. And they're going to have to come up with another mechanism to do so. And I've talked with Ross Childs about this. He was going to be here today, but he's out of town and unavailable this whole week. So we've given them this information and told them they're going to have to come up with another mechanism to fund that and to pay us back. And we just did that Friday. Yes.
It was, because reading the letter from Dean to Mr. Childs, it hit me that there must have been something, was the piece of information that generated the letter just the motion that they made to pay it out of the septic facility fund?
No, at the meeting that you had, they brought that up, and no one said, no, you can't use that money. And so when I talked to Dean about that, Dean said, there's no money there. So there were a couple of meetings back and forth to determine how much money was really available.
Yeah, and I clearly remember saying myself that, no, I didn't care where the money came from. If they had money there, that was fine. But they seem to have now interpreted that as that's the only place we have to pay it from. And if we don't have money there, well, we don't have to pay it.
Well, that's news to me. I haven't heard that.
No?
When I went to East Bay's meeting, I was just the bearer of great news on Monday night. I told him about the budget cuts in the county, and then I mentioned that this was coming up this Wednesday. And I had called Dean on this, and I said, what action are you looking for on this? And he said, not really any action, just information. And I mentioned to them and provided copies of everything in the packet related to this to the East Bay's board. And Glenn asked me a question, and he said, the only reason we made that motion is we were told there were sufficient funds in the septic treatment facility. So he said, I don't understand where this is coming from. He said, I was led to believe at the meeting that there were sufficient funds in there, and that's why they made the motion.
I think that's probably accurate.
Okay.
I think Ross has he's projecting it based on revenues, but, he's not paid, I don't think he's aware of all the expenditures that go along with it. And so, Dean looks at the actual fund balance and says, it's just not there. And so he knows that now.
Is this a timing issue then, that at the time, back in May when we passed the motion, there was enough money there, and by the time they made their motion, there wasn't?
No, there has not been sufficient funds in the septic facility fund for all of 2010. We repaid part of the $200,000 advance that was made at the end of 2009, and this is not as complicated as a fund balance analysis. It's simply looking at the available cash in the fund. There has not been sufficient cash to cover this all year.
What's your latest number and the date of how much money is in that fund?
When I looked at this I think I put this letter together on the 9th, the cash balance was actually under the balance that's supposed to be there for the remaining obligation under the bonds, under the capital. So the cash is less than $200,000 at this point.
See, and they're under the impression that they've reinstated, I talked to Ross Childs, and he's under the impression that they put the money back into that construction fund, the whole $200,000, and that's whole now. And he thought he had revenue in addition to that. I don't think that Dean and I ever felt there was revenue in that fund to pay this. Ross Childs felt that there was. But if you recall at the meeting, all you said was, we want it repaid.
Right.
And Ross said, well, if we think we have money in there to pay it, and so we didn't really care.
it seemed like you didn't either. You just said it's going to be repaid one way or another, and so if there was money there, they could use it. If there wasn't, they're going to have to come up with another mechanism to do it, either loaning it from those 5 townships or something to pay back that $58,000.
Well, are we talking about 2 different funds here for the septic treatment
No.
facility? Just one?
It's all in one.
No.
There's a
But-
construction.
But you're trying to maintain, go back to the $200,000. Could you explain that briefly?
Well, prior to the October, I don't know if it's an October 31st or a November 1st debt service payments. The debt service payments are due on the 2 bond issues semi-annually.
Right.
We did not have sufficient cash in the fund last October to make the larger of the 2 payments. So the county general fund, there was action taken by the board to advance cash. It's a short-term cash advance to cover that debt service payment. We were able to repay almost half of that at the end of the year based on funds that were generated. This is one fund. That's the benefit of fund accounting. This is not commingled with anything. It's not part of the general fund. It's not part of the DPW. It's a standalone fund. It has a cash balance, a fund balance. It has its own revenues, its own expenditures. We still have that obligation from a year ago. It's $105,000. And based on activity to date, the revenues, you may have a situation where revenues are exceeding or in excess of greater than expenditures, but the cash is not sufficient to repay the advance from a year ago, and it's clearly not sufficient to pay the $58,602 that was asked to be repaid by those 5 Carrington
Because
townships.
we didn't do a cash advance on the $58,000. We just paid it and then asked to be reimbursed. Is that correct?
That is correct. The bond payments will be made to maintain the county's credit rating.
Right.
And we advised the board that the county treasurer would make those payments.
But I want to see if we can simplify this. The $200,000 that you asked about, that $200,000 is money that, I'm going to call it probably the wrong thing, but it is reserved to pay the remainder of the construction costs for the project. Is that correct?
Correct. This fund originally had the bond proceeds of $7.8 million. It was an issue of $6.5 million and $1.3. Because the design-build contract has not been completed, you have not taken ownership of that facility. We're holding back, I think it's $231,000.
So consider the 231 as retainage.
At the point that we accept the plant,
we have to pay that.
We have to pay $231,000 to the people who built the plant for us. And we don't even have that in the fund.
That's correct.
Okay, and how much money goes out in operations every month, roughly?
Oh, those are tough questions. The largest payment is the contractual obligation to the city for the contract, and
That's quarterly, isn't it?
No, they invoice us monthly.
Do they know?
Okay.
I don't want to say what the number is, but I think it's just under $40,000 a month. So, and then there are payroll charges from the DPW staff. Those ongoing expenses are basically using up the revenue that's coming in. So there has not been enough cash generated from operations to repay the advance to the county from a year ago, the end of last year, or to cover the $58,602 that you requested about a month ago.
Or at this point, to replenish the reserve for the retainage.
And then there's, on November 1st, that more or less $600,000 payment looming. Is that correct?
Not quite that large, but it's
quite
the
that
larger of the two. I would say it's probably $475.
Yeah.
Total?
$475. Right. That's due November 1st.
Yes.
Yes.
Is there a possibility that they are not going to get enough revenue just to pay operating expenses without bond payments?
I would say the answer to that is yes, there's a possibility.
That's possible.
But, I mean, right now, the revenues, as Dean just said, the revenues currently are tracking with the expense. They're just not paying any of the shortfall back. But if you look at that over a period of time, several years, obviously the shortfall is still there, still there, still there, and in some cases building, as indicated by needing it in May. So I would say over a period of 3 or 4 years, probably true. This year, as you'll hear Ross Child say, we're bringing in enough revenue to pay the bills, but they're just not taking care of the other things that's necessary, so.
And what happens if something breaks?
Well, that's the point, and I think that's why your action in May was appropriate. And, frankly, I think you should be talking now about what your plan is for November.
I agree.
As in, are you going to say, that's yours? We're not funding it? We're not going to loan it? If I were them, I'd like to know ahead of time what they're going to be facing come November if there's not enough money in the fund.
Well, Dennis, I heard this board, although it tends to change upon occasion, I heard this board when we had this discussion about the money we're waiting for now, the $50-some thousand, say that no money would be given and/or advanced unless we had a business plan, and I still haven't seen one.
Yeah, if I can comment on that, because back on May 12th, at our RMA meeting on that date, there was a motion made to do a 50-50 share with the townships, and it was defeated on a 2-7 vote. And the comment was, consensus of the board was to bring the item back for discussion at next month's meeting, that is to say the June meeting, when additional information from the business plan will be available. So I looked up the June meeting minutes, and it was like, oh, well, we're still working on the business plan. And now it's July, and Mr. Childs is, out of town or whatever. We still have nothing on a business plan. We still have that 105,000 from last year. We had the 58,000 from May, which hasn't even been addressed, and the 475,000 is looming. And the problem is that even if we say, no, we're not going to advance you the money, the county will still make the payment.
The treasurer
because the treasurer will make the payment for the county because, we're not going to be in default on the bonds. And again, nothing is resolved.
Well, one solution to that, Commissioner, would be if the board is really hinging their decision on a business plan, one action you could take would be to say, if we don't have a business plan by August 15th or some date specific, we are putting you on notice that we will not be making the payment in November, or that we will be requiring you to repay the payment in November, and telling them that now.
Do we have any recourse with the 5 townships? Do we have any ability to, force them to, cover this debt?
Well, ultimately, under the contracts, they have responsibility for the operation of this facility, and I think that's been said time and time again that yes, you do.
Mike, do you have a question? Okay, Beth.
Bruce, you're on Board of Public Works.
I am.
What is the status of what's being done to address this financial issue? I know that the subcommittee that 4 of us sat on, we forwarded several things. I don't know that you'd call any of them a business plan, but several suggestions that ranged from the budget plan and basically a voluntary special assessment district, for lack of a better term, as well as something that included a special assessment district. We forwarded all that on for evaluation. What is the approach that the BPW has taken? Where are they at with this?
I believe that the assessment is going nowhere. I believe that they're leaving it up to sewer and water as they're the people that control the money, they control the resources, and they're responsible for the plan, and it's up to them and the G5 to come up with a comprehensive plan.
Okay, so are they taking, so you mentioned the assessment. As far as the voluntary plan, voluntary special assessment, are they doing, is BPW doing any statistical research to see if any of the septage owners would find that plan valuable? Are they doing any surveying or anything like that right now?
No, they surveyed holding tanks.
Yeah, holding tanks, but this is a different thing.
I don't think they did anything with septic tanks.
This is different, and that, if they do something like that, their increase would be marginal, so. And anyway, so there's not really any action or progress being made with respect to this at the BPW. You're waiting for sewer and water, basically, to bring
Right,
something
the guaranteeing
forward.
townships to come up with a plan and how they're going to fund the septic plan.
Okay,
Larry?
thank you.
Dennis, I guess I'm a bit frustrated a little bit. I think that we have the information that Beth really worked hard on, did an excellent job with the Septic Finance Committee package that was presented as a summary of a lot of ideas and a lot of options. And there have been other things that have come up over the last several months, like the incentive plan that Manigold is working on. And we know that there's going to be an emplacement of an expansion of from 15 to 25 miles at some point in time. We know that there's some possibility of refinancing the bonds in 2013 and 2014 for a reduction of debt service. We know that there's been a lot of efforts amongst some folks on the Board of Public Works to meet with the surrounding counties to see if we can get more flow from them and how we might be able to do that. I know that Wayne Clatter is working with Dr. Love from the University of Michigan on potentially new flows to the plant, like fruit processing plants and their waste that are being investigated. So I don't know if my sense is it feels like it's on the back burner instead of the front burner in terms of trying to accumulate all this and put it into a sort of a business plan that people can see the general direction and the work effort that's moving forward with the plan in terms of improving its cash flow. So I don't know because Ross is part-time and he's doing the job right now of a full-time, and then adding this to his plate, realistically, is that possible or not to have him really work on this thing and try to accomplish everything else that's on his plate? Is this something that, I think this is important to do, not only for the board and the 5 townships that they're on a hook on this thing, but, for the general public to understand what things have been done in terms of, things we want to work on in terms of possibilities to make this thing cash flow properly. So I'm just wondering if you might want to check with Ross over there, and if he doesn't have time to do the business plan, we got to find someone that can and accumulate all this information and kind of work forward with this plan, because I don't want to have this thing lag to the point where we get closer to the end of the year, the business plan's not done, we don't have the time, staff, and people to do it. We're still back to what are we going to do with the plan if it runs short? So I think it all ties back to, what's in the business plan, how we're going to implement the business plan, and, do we really have the time and resources to help do that?
Well, I think that question is a good question, and I will talk with Ross about it. It's hard for me, some of you attend the Board of Public Works and the committee meetings, and I think they're working in a whole number of areas. It's more of a, kind of a shotgun approach to it, and I don't know that we're coming to, I don't know that we're getting close to the business plan. I know that Ross's time is limited. I don't really know how best to refocus attention on this, and I don't mean to anger anybody, but I really think that probably what you should do is you should take action to say, we're not going to fund any shortfall in November, because and it's not anybody's fault, but I think attention needs to really be focused in on that, and maybe their solution will be, listen, we're going to fund this, we're going to figure out a way to fund this thing. I don't know, but I think it's the point where you have to kind of, and I think in fairness to them, you can't tell them that in November. I think you have to tell them that ahead of time so that they can kind of get ready for that. I don't know. That's the best thing I can come up with in terms of that. I will do exactly what you asked, Commissioner, but...
Mr. Chairman, I want to make a motion, and then I want to have additional discussion. I want to make a motion that we advise the Board of Public Works that if we do not have a business plan in place and a financial plan for the septic plant by September 1st, 2010, we will not be making the November payment without having their money in hand.
Support.
Motion and support, any further discussion?
I think the discussion comes is, you know, Larry, you say that you're frustrated and whether Ross has the time. That's not my problem. That is the Board of Public Works problem. It's not my problem.
Right.
Those 5 Garantine townships are on the hook for this bill. And what this motion does is just put them on notice. Either you will get this done and to us by September 1st, or we will not make the bond payment unless we have your money in hand. And I don't care whether the money is, if the money's available in the septic treatment plant, monies, and they can give it to us, that's fine. If it has to come from those member townships, they are the guaranteeing townships on this payment. And they need to step up. This business plan has been ongoing for pretty close to 2 years now, and we still don't have it. It's not that complicated. You know, I understand that they're trying to identify funding, they're trying to identify this or that, but that is not my problem either. The fact is, those 5 townships are on the hook to pay this bill, and either they come up with a plan of how they're going to pay it, or else they're going to figure out a way to give us the money out of their pocket. It's not our money.
Larry, your comment?
Well, like the earlier vote, and I think Beth and I voted no on it, the request for the repayment of the $58,000. I think what this board's doing is shameful. You got an entity that's absolutely having some financial troubles, and here we are talking about how we're going to corner them on posturing, and we're going to get them. Well, I think that's absolutely crazy. And let me tell you, Sunday's motion, I'm going to vote no on it. You know why I'm going to vote no? Because November 1st, the treasurer's going to make the payment. There's no teeth in it. What we ought to be doing is focusing on what we can do to help them overcome this. And there's a lot of factors. October 1st, the 25-mile radius comes into play. Or what we ought to really be pursuing is this county board taking over that plan and getting them out of the picture. It's a county-wide facility. It's not a 5-township facility, because I believe that everybody in the county that's not on sewer has a septic tank. So it becomes a county problem.
All right, Ross.
First of all, Dennis, I think it's been pretty clear by this board, or at least many members of this board, that we've been looking for a solution to this problem for a long time. I mean, for you to imply that we haven't notified them that it's a problem, I think is a little ridiculous, honestly.
Well, Commissioner, first, let me just say that if that's the way you interpreted what I said, that wasn't what I meant. What I meant is you've said it for a long time, but for the last 4 years or 3 years, every time they've been short, except this last one, you've paid.
Well, and why do we pay? Because we ruin our own credit rating if we don't.
Well, no, but what I mean is you've paid and not asked repayment. So if I stated it wrong, I apologize. That was not my intention.
Okay.
You've been clear about the fact that we need to get this thing solved. All I'm saying is, if you say now, look it, come November, we've paid, by my calculations, we've loaned them $700,000 to $800,000 so far on this.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying, if you say now it's your turn to step up and loan some money, and loan yourself some money, yeah, I didn't mean to say that you haven't let them know.
And I'm going to vote against this motion, not because I disagree with it, Sonny. What I fear is that then if they present some sort of business plan, no matter how foolish, and there are some really foolish business plans out there for resolving this, it implies that we will make the payment because, gee, they presented a business plan. It doesn't say anything about the quality of the business plan. This is still a revenue problem. And Commissioner Fleece, you think we're being mean to the Board of Public Works? We don't have any leverage over the Board of Public Works. They basically just take this thing and dump it in our lap every 6 months. And you yourself have not come up with any solution to the revenue problem on this thing. So for you to say, well, yeah, let's have the county take it over, okay, I'd be fine with that if you couple that with how we're going to generate enough revenue to pay for the plan, because that's still the issue. But you're saying the county should take it over. What you're basically saying is, let's dump it on all the county taxpayers together to make the payment, which is basically what's been happening. But we've been covering it up with this idea that it's a short-term cash advance, or whatever you want to call it. except now we're reaching the point where the short-term cash advances aren't going to be repaid.
Chris?
Although I supported the motion, and I basically did it for discussion purposes, I am going to vote no on the motion for two reasons. One is I will not vote to trash the county's credit rating. I simply can't do that. However, as soon as I think this motion, I agree with Commissioner Richardson. Just because we're presented with a business plan doesn't mean it's going to be a good one.
Right.
I also agree that this has been on the backs of all county taxpayers for much too long. I have said repeatedly, and I've been right up until today, that the townships are not going to do what is necessary to fund that plant, and there are options out there. They're just basically not, they're not taking the steps that they need to take. But unless we stop the cash advances, this is going to go on ad nauseum, and it just simply has to stop. I do believe, and I will make the motion after I think this will fail, because I do think it will fail. I will make the motion that we inform the townships that we are going to ask not only for the November 1st bond payment reimbursement, but for the short-term cash advance that we have given them that we did not address. We only addressed the $52,000.
Beth?
Oh, where to start, but I'll probably forget half of it, but I'll just mention one or two that I'm remembering. First of all, take note when Larry Fleece and I vote together. As always, take a look at the issue. And anyway, particularly in that we represent different constituencies as well with respect to this issue. But, oh my gosh. Sonny, you mentioned that the staffing shortage and situation at the DPW is not our responsibility, but yet it is. This is a difficult situation. It really is still our responsibility too, to an extent that we employ Dennis and they answer to Dennis by the resolution of the Board of Commissioners. So, but I understand the difficulty in the implementation of that Dennis has because of the Sewer and Water Committee. So it's a tough situation. But, I would support Dennis in providing maybe a little bit more heavy-handed oversight with respect to the DPW. I do think that the townships are looking at their responsibility in this. I don't sense any of them shirking that whatsoever. I even heard conversation at East Bay when they were talking about expenditures of a total different sort, whether or not they were making them, saying, well, remember, we have the septic treatment facility. So I don't think it's escaped their attention by any means. Thank you.
Who's the vice chairman?
I am.
Okay. Vice chairman, can I make one comment?
Is there any other? Yes, you may.
Well, I want to be clear. I don't intend this, and I know you didn't mean it that way, I don't intend this as this discussion and any action you take to be heavy-handed necessarily. The way I look at this is simply this. We are partners, and for the first 3 years, the county made the short-term cash advance of $700,000 or $800,000. It's not unreasonable as partners to say, we'd like you to make the next several cash advances as we move forward. That's really what I'm saying. It's a partnership, and so I don't see this as being, something that we're putting on them. It's just saying, as partners, we'd like you to, take the next piece, especially faced with the budget situation.
And we do have to remember, I want to remember that partnership, and that's why I won't vote for it. But we have to remember in that partnership, although, you say it was the 5 townships, remember, your predecessors who sat in those chairs approved these contracts too. And so this is a responsibility.
We approved the bonds.
Right, approved the bonds.
Yes.
And, but I also believe some of them sat on the BPW too.
That's true.
So we have to keep that in mind. But I do, this is kind of lagging on, that's an understatement, and I do think that we should kind of push them to make some movement on this and show some progress.
Is there any other discussion on them? Sonny?
I guess the point I have to make you know, and I appreciate the discussion that's happened, because I think it's important that this discussion happen. And the discussion can't happen without a motion, and that's why the motion was made in the first place. You know, I think we all understand that this is not an easy thing to get through. It's very complicated. The entities involved, you know, have had personnel changes. We've had the issue with the Director of Public Works being deployed, 2 or 3 times now. He's deployed right now for the 3rd time. So, you know, we don't have a full-time director in that position. And it's important that we have this discussion. And yes, I like Russ, have seen a lot of lousy business plans. So just the fact that they come in with documentation that says they have a business plan, that doesn't mean I'm going to fix it. I'm going to be here to fix this thing. So what I would like to do, and although it's kind of strange, is I'm going to withdraw the motion, because I think the motion, you know, at least in my mind, the motion was made for the purpose of having this discussion that we've had here this morning. And I think that we now can carry back, or maybe we'll come up with a different motion, but we couldn't have the discussion without having the motion. And that's why we've done it. So I would like to withdraw the motion, and hopefully the second will be withdrawn, and then possibly we can come up with another motion. But I think the discussion that we've just had to take place before we could come up with a truly fruitful motion, if you would.
I'll withdraw support.
All right. Chris?
I would like to make a motion that we inform the Board of Public Works that we would like to be reimbursed for all of the short-term cash advances that have been made to date on the septic treatment facility, and that we notify them that on November 1st, we will make the bond payment, but we expect reimbursement immediately after we make the bond payment on November 2nd.
Do you want to put a figure on that?
I don't know what the full bond payment is.
Well, I think we have it. It's, no, I mean, a figure on the short-term cash advances.
Hang on a minute, what is it? 59.
The short-term cash advance from last year is $105,168.03. And then it's $58,602 for the April 30th bond payments.
So we've got $163,770.03. Do you want to add that to your motion?
Yes.
I'll second it.
Okay,
We've been here quite a while. I'm getting motion sickness.
Can we order lunch?
Larry?
I guess I don't disagree with Commissioners Maxton's motion, but I guess I have a second thought to that, is that, as you know, the Board of Public Works did make a motion to suggest to the county and the 5 townships that, perhaps a way to deal with this thing is to split the shortfall as a loan made by the county and the loan made by the townships 50-50. But that was really subject to some further discussion that, the townships weren't willing to address that issue, and we weren't really willing to address that issue unless we had a business plan. We felt comfortable with the business plan in terms of how it would be implemented. So I don't want to have just a complete slash-your-throat resolution being sent around to the 5 townships and to the Board of Public Works. I would support the motion, but perhaps, an additional disclosure that, if a business plan is completed and we felt comfortable with the implementation of the business plan, that, the Board of Commissioners would potentially could readdress this issue. So.
Now, I'm also under the impression, correct me if I'm wrong, that the Board of Public Works doesn't really have any money to pay this, that it comes through the Sewer and Water Committee who finances this. So you can tell the Board of Public Works all you want, but if the Sewer and Water Committee does not finance this, it won't happen.
Yeah, it'll come through the townships.
Right. I'm curious as why you would make the motion to the Board of Public Works and not the Sewer and Water Committee.
Because they are the entity involved with the authority over it. The Sewer and Water Committee is a subgroup. It truly has no authority per se, other than the fact that they are the
recommending body.
Thank you.
And as Glenn Lyle pointed out last week, that they have all the money and that the Board of Public Works should not be committing money that is not theirs, which,
Well, and that's an ongoing process with the Board of Public Works makeup. And that's been the discussion for an extended length of time about the reorganization of the Board of Public Works.
Well, I think whether the intent is, I'm sorry, Commissioner, go ahead.
No, I was making a
Whether the motion states Board of Public Works or not, the intent here, I think, is that the 5 guaranteeing townships will come up with the money either in the budget or by adding money to the amount that's short.
Sure they will.
I just wanted to add that point, though.
They'll come up with it just like they have been for 5 years.
I'd like to forget about cornering them into a decision with the repayments and the septic treatment facility. I'd like to find out a way to corner them into developing an authority.
Well, I
Just a
think
comment.
I think if they come, whether this motion passes, fails, whatever, I'm hoping that very directly, we see a true plan about how they're going to reorganize and how they're going to financially support this process.
Don't see it working unless it's
Well,
an authority.
Well, but that's not our decision, it's their decision. We cannot direct them to create an authority.
I'm not so much impressed with a nice little plan as I am performance.
Chris
The
made
world
this-
is full
I'm
of plans.
Chris made the motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And who seconded? Ross. All right.
Can we restate it?
Say all in
Right.
favor.
Any further discussion?
Restate?
Or you want to restate the motion? That
I couldn't even catch it all. I was going to look at the video.
My motion was that the county board inform the Board of Public Works that we are requesting full payment of our cash advance to date, which is $163,770.03, and that we inform the Board of Public Works that we will be making the November 1st bond payment. We expect reimbursement of that bond payment immediately after on November 2nd.
All right, any further discussion? I think we'll need a roll call, please.
Commissioner Stepka?
Yes.
Friend?
No.
Inman?
Nope.
Wheelock?
No.
Police?
No.
Max Bauer?
Yes?
Thomas?
No.
Richardson?
Yes.
Hooper?
No.
Oh, what was that?
Okay, motion fails.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we request from the BPW a financial outline to deal with their shortfalls regarding the septic facility, and we would like that report by September 30th.
Would you repeat your
Sure.
motion? I
just
couldn't
did
hear it
off
all.
the- That we request from the BPW a financial outline to deal with the shortfalls regarding the septic treatment facility by September 30th. So basically, how they're going to address the shortfalls. You can call it a business plan, you can call it whatever you want. I just said financial outline.
So a financial outline, you mean you want an assessment of their financial condition and a plan for how they're going to address it for November?
Yes, and the reason I didn't term it as business plan is some people say, that's a business plan, that's not a business plan. I don't care what the heck you call it. Tell me how you're going to deal with the financial shortfall.
Support.
Okay, discussion, Ross?
Well, I'm going to vote against this just because this seems totally redundant. If we haven't been asking for this for the last, as long as I've been on the board, I don't know what we've been asking for. So.
It's kind of a reiteration of what we've already requested, isn't it?
It's just a form,
Yeah,
giving them a
but then by
deadline by
putting a
which they have
deadline,
to
you're
have it.
basically
Okay.
giving them an extra 2.5 months. I mean, we requested this months ago, literally. So.
Oh, I would be open to amending it until August 30th.
Is that an amendment?
You saying August 30th instead of?
I'll just keep it September 30th.
Okay, Larry?
Dennis, do we already have a board pass motion requesting the townships to come up with the shortfall? We have that in place already right now for the 50 or whatever we're talking about at this point. We already have that in place.
Yes.
All right, okay, fine. All right.
So you just say we already have this in place, essentially?
Yeah, we've already asked them to cover the
What-
shortfall for the 50,
Right, they have to have a plan.
58,
Larry?
whatever it is. All right.
The motion he's talking about, Larry's talking about, what I want to know is, what are we going to repossess if they don't pay?
You can have
What
it.
part of each township are we going to go get, so we get our 58,000?
I believe if you actually read the intergovernmental contract, there are systems in it by which they guarantee the bond payment.
Through their revenue sharing.
Through their
payments.
revenue sharing. We do not have to pay them back their portion of tax dollars that we collect, so as that we can collect that money.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that correct?
Yes, I believe it's revenue sharing payments.
You know, the county collects the money, and we can take the payment out of that revenue before we disperse it back to the township.
I want to point out, I think it's important, because somebody mentioned it earlier, I've heard a lot of discussion from those 5 townships about their willingness to take responsibility for this. This is not, I'm not talking about the plant, but to make payments. You know, I've heard Rob Manigold, I've heard Glenn Lyle say from time to time, listen, and Chuck Korn and others, listen, we know we have to do this, so I think they understand.
I'm glad you make that point, because that's not the intent of the motion. I hear that. I've heard the same things that you've heard. I heard what I mentioned at the East Bay Township meeting, with that very cognizant in their mind when they're making their financial plans at the township level. What my motion is intended to do is to give the BPW a request to get that information to us, so that, you know, hopefully we don't continue this process of lagging along.
Ross?
And Dennis, I agree with you. I've heard those comments too, but nobody's written us any checks yet.
You're correct.
Chris?
And I'm going to repeat myself, until we pull the money, we're not going to see any solutions.
And the checks weren't written from the township specifically because they were under the impression that the money was in the fund.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to get a business plan together for the Public Works by September 30th. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same?
No.
Aye. Okay, have a roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Friend?
Yes.
Inman?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes.
Blease?
Yes.
Max Bauer?
No.
Thomas?
No.
Richardson?
No.
Stepka?
Yes.
Hooper?
No.
5-4.
Carries.
Carried.
Passed.
Okay, pass 5-4.
Okay.
Okay.
Can we move on to,
I'm worn down.
What did you say?
I'm already worn down. We got more stuff to go.
okay, now we're back
Yeah, it
to
is.
the receive and file, number 3, the Parks and Recreation Report on page 20.
Before we get started on this, this should have been taken care of under number 8. It says including items removed from consent calendar.
Yep, you're right.
There's no reason in the world why somebody should have to sit here for 2 hours listening to this just to take care of a couple items that was
I
pulled.
would echo that.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner.
You deserve combat pay for waiting here for.
Yeah.
We'll take Bruce out and slap him around.
Thank you.
Jason, the reason I pulled the Parks and Rec from receive and file is I'm looking at the baseball numbers, and you projected revenue of $64,200 from the baseball program. Your revenue came in at $34,537.50. Would you address that, please?
Yeah, that revenue number was based on 720 kids. We've had 550 kids register for the program. Our expenditures within that budget department are in proportion with the revenues that came in. The largest portion of our expenditures was purchase of new equipment. It was planned for 720 kids coming into the program and purchasing enough equipment for 720 kids. We've had 550. Our expenditures were proportionate with 550 kids.
I'm sorry, where is that in the Parks report?
It's not in his written report, it's in the Parks and Rec packet.
Oh, I see.
The other question I have, Jason, is...
That's a discussion that should have been happened with the Parks and Rec. With the report that we got doesn't have any of that in there, so I don't know, if you weren't part of the Parks and Recreation packet, I don't know how you'd have been able to ask that question. So I guess, I guess that's a discussion that you should have with your Parks and Recreation Board before if those minutes have been approved and sent to us, because the minutes that are approved by the Parks and Recreation Board and sent to us do not reflect any of that discussion. So I don't know how we would have been expected to have pulled that and had any discussion for it.
I'm just asking questions. Where in our bylaws does it say that I cannot ask questions?
And then no one says they can. I don't know how you pulled the minutes based on the fact that
I didn't
of
pull
information
minutes.
that's not in the minutes.
I pulled a financial report. I did not pull minutes.
You pulled the Parks and Recreation report. The Parks and Recreation report that's in our packet is complete, doesn't have any of the things that you're discussing. Doesn't matter. We're through there now.
The next question I have, Jason, is on the expenses. You list $22,773.71 to date. I understand that most of that is equipment. My question is, you projected expenses of $64,200. I just broke out the labor, and the labor you anticipated to be I subtracted what you've spent, and I subtracted what you estimated. And the estimate is another $22,897. Do you still estimate that that labor number is going to be correct?
I'm not prepared to answer that question. This is an issue that should be presented. This is something that we'll be discussing during our budget hearing. I'm not prepared to answer that question for this meeting.
Okay. Then that concludes my numbers on baseball, and I'll ask them tomorrow night. The next question I have is on the aquatics report.
Can we deal with one of these items at a time?
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the Parks and Recreation report as it was in our packet.
Support.
You have a
Question.
motion, support, discussion?
Question for you. At the end of Civic Center baseball, and I noted in your report that you mentioned about that, and I was glad to see it. Parents will be provided an online evaluation of the program, which is good. You're dealing with most parents through email, I think you said, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's good. Now, I understand that at the end of the Civic Center baseball program, that you'll be providing us a report with the revenues, expenditures, and feedback, and what went well and what you would change, and kind of a synopsis of this year. Is that correct?
I can certainly do it. That's something that I anticipated for the Parks and Recreation Commission.
Okay. Given that it's a new program, could we receive a copy of that report that kind of just goes over everything?
Absolutely.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and support. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same?
The next question I have is on Kim's aquatics report. And Kim, you provided us with swim lesson numbers, and that is in our packet, Commissioner Wheelock. What you did not provide us with are payroll numbers. And I think what I would like to see as a commissioner is I would like to compare payroll and numbers of students from last spring to this spring. For me, it's about unit cost. And I base this on the Lutra report. The Lutra report says that our contribution margin was 53%, and we need to be shooting for 77%. But if your students are increasing in numbers by 25%, but your labor is increasing 100%, then you're going the wrong way. So I'm going to ask you next time to please provide labor numbers. Okay. The other thing that I have to mention is you gave us summer lesson numbers in your report, 77. We had 77 students last summer. You neglected to mention that the pool was closed last summer for an extended period of time. So when you take a look at the summer numbers, and I'd like that as well, I would like you to go back 1 year.
Our numbers for summer 2008 were 135 swimmers. So we are up from 2008 as well.
And I would like payroll as well, because that will tell me contribution margin and what direction you're going.
Why don't you guys also, just as a thought, when you look at the payroll issue that Commissioner's asking about, if you could maybe summarize it as cost per student and compare the years. How much is it cost per student? That would give you the number you're looking for, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It would help.
That would be a way to do it.
Kim, swim shop, great idea.
Thank you. That was Lutra.
As a mom who's been to the pool and didn't have a swim diaper at that very time, I think that's a pretty good idea.
Larry?
I guess, getting back to your question, Dennis, would, since, take a step back, the board did the Lucha report. Part of the recommendations was the aquatics manager, which we've hired. Appreciate you being here. Now, when we've hired the aquatics manager, obviously we have an expense for that position. And when we come back to the cost per student or whatever, I mean, do we, how do we handle, obviously we have, we have a cost for her position. I mean, do you divide that into cost per swimmer, or do you take it out? Or, I mean, how would you handle the management position of the pool when you're looking at from year to year?
Well, really what you need to do is allocate part of that cost against the program, but you have to, and we would have to give that some thought. It's not real simple because we have, 15 different programs that go on in that pool. So, well, probably I'd have to talk with Dean and Jason about that, but probably what we would do is figure out what percentage of the time is spent with each of the programs and then allocate that cost to the manager back against those programs. That would be the way we would do it.
All right, okay.
Which
And we
is
can look
actually
at that.
probably going to increase the cost per individual,
I would think
not
it would.
reduce it because
Right.
of the fact that we truly have a manager.
Absolutely.
Well, we are down one full-time lifeguard, so,
Actually, 2. Yeah, 1 from last year, but
Mhm.
actually 2 positions. So, yeah, that would be the way we would do that.
All right, okay.
Not to raise anybody's hair up on the back of their neck or anything, but the discussion that you two were just having a few minutes earlier, I'd say, Chris, it'd be a great idea if you as the chair of the Parks and Rec aren't satisfied with the reports. I didn't have any problem with them when I read them, but I would say through the Parks Commission, I would talk about what, your board thinks should be included if there isn't
Right, that's a good
sufficient
idea.
information.
That's a good thought.
You know what I mean? Kind
I
of
think
just
that's an
outline.
excellent suggestion.
Do we have a motion?
I move we receive and file the aquatic report.
Support. We have a motion to support, by anybody. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, Jason, and I'm sorry, you guys. Septic treatment facility discussion. Okay, now let's go on to new business. Budget discussion.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, we wanted to get the first 2 items before you. I know it's been a long meeting, but we wanted to give you an opportunity to discuss this in some detail if you like. I guess, let me mix it. Did you want to take a 2-minute recess since the meeting's gone so long? Did you want to do this?
Ronnie's nodding.
Or do you want me to take this to Ways and Means and just hold it for next week and do it on next week, or do you want to do it now?
Get her done.
Let's take a 2-minute break for Bonnie.
Will this discussion impact your direction to department heads?
No, this is more education for you and time for you. What our intention was here was to take items like this and spend a good half hour discussing it with you so that you're comfortable with it. And my suggestion is, because this ran so long, maybe you want to wait and do it at Ways and Means next week. It's up to you.
Is Ways and Means to be another long meeting, or?
I don't know what the agenda looks like, Commissioner, but it's important that we get through some of this stuff.
Well, Ways and
we
Means
don't need
is
to
our
talk.
financial meeting, so I would suggest that we have
that'd
this
be fine.
discussion at finance.
You want to do it at Finance next week?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Can I
We'll do
answer?
that.
I was prepared to ask a question that we can talk about later, but I'll
Sure.
ask it now.
Yeah.
When I was at Peninsula Township's board meeting last night, I had about 5 people follow me out the door and talk to me about various items. One of them was a gentleman by the name of Paul Olson, and he was there representing Municipal Underwriters of Michigan Insurance.
Township insurance. Township insurance.
Right. He also told me that he does county insurance for several counties in the state of Michigan. And he said that he believed that if we bid our insurance, that we could save 30 to 40%. And so I just wanted to toss that out there.
Great.
And Dennis, I will give you his business card.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I have it. He has called me, and I have not been able to call him back, but he's on my list of things to
Actually
do
on
today.
Dean's list.
All right. That's all.
I've known him for 30 years.
Okay, this is a moment for second public comment. Seeing none, we can move on to the Commissioner Committee reports. Larry has something to
Just
say?
real quickly, I just want to let everyone know that we have met twice regarding appointment applications, and what we decided to do at our first meeting is, the board did, at a previous time, agree that we should have some sort of appointment policy or process that the public would understand about, how we do appointments. So we are tackling that for the first two meetings, and that's basically summarizing what appointments are available, how the selection process works, some of the items in terms of residency requirements and those kinds of things, number of appointments that the board would make. And from there, we are going to bridge into the actual application and the information on the application. We've got a number of counties that we have gotten copies from that we're going to work from that have a lot of merit to. There's a number of counties that have criminal record questions on them as well. One of the things that we're going to deal with is potentially having the application available on our website that somebody could input online or copy and send to us. So there's a number of, I think, some really progressive discussions that are going on in this meeting, and we're real fortunate to have Commissioner Max Bauer there, Richardson there, Stepka there, and Commissioner Friend has joined us, and she's got a lot of valuable input as well in the committee. So we're probably going to have a couple more meetings. We're in the process of trying to schedule something for early August, but we want to take our time on this thing and get it right. And I think we really have explored some really cool ideas. So anybody else want to add anything, that'd be fine. Okay.
I just don't vote, I moderate.
Yes, you
Yeah,
do.
but you do a great
You
job
do
at
that.
it. So.
Any other reports from the commissioners? Any notices and/or announcements? Sonny?
If you recall, last month, we had a discussion in regard to the possibility of creating a housing trust fund with revenues from foreclosed properties. On July 28th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in our training room next door, Mary Brooks, a nationally recognized expert on the creation and administration of housing trust funds, will be here to do a training session with our land bank committee and the local stakeholders, if you will, the local housing groups. She will be here at 4 o'clock on the 28th to do a presentation for us about how this actually works and how you implement it and make it happen and what the advantages and disadvantages would be. And I just wanted everyone to be aware that we would be holding this meeting, and you are certainly welcome.
Chris?
Again, at last night's Peninsula Township Board meeting, I was followed out the door after I did my Commission on Aging, and they did announce that, which was in the paper today, that Peninsula Township Library has reached an agreement with the Tattle Board. But I was asked by the people in attendance at the meeting that we as a commission consider when we do our appointments by district. So I wanted to pass that on. The other thing I wanted to tell you, and I've got this, and Bonnie, I'll just give it to you and you can make copies. I went to the MDOT road meeting yesterday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and they had maps out showing how much rehabilitation of road work is going to be done in northern Michigan. And I asked MDOT specifically how many road miles in Grand Traverse County are going to be rehabilitated, and it was a 5-year plan, 2011 through 2015. If they are fully funded, I was told 6.
6 miles?
6 miles. If they are not fully funded, and there is that possibility, we will get 0. And I just wanted to pass that on.
6 or 0, let's see.
There's not much difference there, is there?
There is the people who drive 6 miles.
Well,
Okay,
that's
I
true.
will entertain a motion.
Say goodbye, Dickie.
All right, we're done.
You don't need this card, Dennis?
Hope we got it.
All
Thank
right.
you.